We will defend these police officers.
Listen to police officers' commands, listen to what we tell you, and just stop. The nation needs to realize that when we tell you to do something, do it. And if you're wrong, you're wrong. If you're right, then the courts will figure it out.
We don't get to take the law, we enforce it. But at the end of the day, each and every member should go home safe. Sometimes the use of force is necessary. You need to comply with the police officer, the way the system was meant to be. Comply with the orders of police officers. Resisting arrest is a real and dangerous crime.
Nonpartisan Liberty for All, and I'm your host, Dave Bourne. It is February 17th, 2016, and we are coming to you live from Las Vegas, Nevada. Thank you for tuning in to Nonpartisan Liberty for All. We're on weeknights, Tuesday through Thursday at 7 o'clock Pacific, 10 o'clock Eastern, and you can listen live on Spreaker.com and nonpartisanlibertyforall.com, and to the archives on Spreaker, YouTube, Twitter, SoundCloud, and Tumblr immediately after the show. They are automatically posted to their respective sites. We promote the ideas of true freedom and liberty, meaning being able to do whatever you want as long as you respect the freedom of others and don't directly interfere with their freedom, as well as exposing government for what it is, a mafia based on extortion that rules without consent by threat of force and violence. Today, we have a few different things to talk about. Ken Schortgen will be joining us this week, who joins us every other Wednesday to talk about geopolitics and the economy. There are a lot of things going on in the economy, even though at the State of the Union about 3 weeks ago, according to the president, everything's great and everything's fine, but in reality, that is not the case. So we'll be talking about the economy, among other things, with Ken when he joins us at 8 o'clock Pacific time. Yesterday, I had talked about Justice Scalia and his passing, as well as the Supreme Court and how it was structured within the Constitution. So what I want to make sure I do today before Ken comes on, there were a few things that I don't think I explained as well as I could have. So what we're going to do is go through that, make sure that I explain those clearly and that people understand the meaning of the Constitution when I say that it's essentially meaningless. It's a document that was taken, was written up and then was taken and done with whatever government wanted to do. And when you give power to people, or power over people, that's what happens. So again, one of the main differences I have with a lot of people is that they'll say, well, in the past 10 years, in the past 20 years, in the past 50 years since JFK got assassinated or murdered by the U.S. government, whenever time they want to pick throughout history, that the Constitution started to derail. My whole premise is that governments are the problem. So immediately when you write and finalize that bill, well, I guess when you finalize it, because when you write it, it really doesn't mean anything at that point. Once you finalize a government and implement a government, you have essentially started the path to corruption, to violations of freedom, liberty, and the power of whoever the ones in control are. starting to take over and take control over anybody's lives who lives in that geographical area. So essentially, the whole premise on the Supreme Court supports pretty much my premise, I guess, but it's open to interpretation and you can interpret it any way you want to. But I interpret it as the Constitution is a flawed document, just like every document, and government in itself. And if you look up the definition of government, I mentioned this many times, every definition has the word control in it. That government is the evil. That's where, in my opinion, people are confused. They want to fix government. They want government to work for them. They want government to be fair. They want all of these things. It does not exist in government, because the definition of government has to do with rulers and people ruling over you, not everybody being equal. You can have an organized society where everybody is equal, but that would not be a government. Government rules at the barrel of a gun or any other weapon, whether it's a nuclear weapon or a missile or whatever it might be. That's what government is. So before Ken comes on, we're going to clarify what I failed to 100% clarify yesterday, as well as, if we have time, we'll get into something we didn't have time for yesterday. These parties about the, I guess, exciting candidates, the anti-establishment candidates, Bernie Sanders and Donald Trump. So if we have time, we'll get into that. So I wanted to start off with really what set this off was Marbury versus Madison, which I really didn't talk about yesterday, because the Constitution does not give the Supreme Court the ability to judge the constitutionality of laws. It doesn't. So then you would right away, at least I would, say, well, what the fuck? Who's going to make sure? And I'm just playing this from, see, this is always hard for me to do because I don't believe in government and I think it's a bunch of bullshit. Obviously, I don't believe in the Constitution. I believe in an organized society. But the first thing that most people would say is, okay, we're looking at a government that is going to fail to protect people's rights and freedoms, which of course it fails to do that now. So what's the fucking difference? But in theory, it should be able to protect your rights and freedoms. So what happens when your Second Amendment rights are violated? Well, what would happen now is it would end up in the Supreme Court, depending on how the Supreme Court was, quote unquote, stacked, because it's all about who appoints who, what party they're a part of, and it all has to do with politics. And people will say, well, back then it didn't have to do with politics. And maybe it didn't. I don't know. I wasn't around back then, and I'm not an expert in history. But I will say that it's just common sense that if you have 9 people essentially making laws and interpreting your government, and not only that, doing it by majority rules. It's not like all 9 have to agree, which still wouldn't be good enough, but it'd be better than just majority rules. You have a problem there. So before Marbury versus Madison, the Supreme Court did not rule, which was about, 20 years, if that, It was in 1803. It wasn't very long. Actually, it's probably around 16 years, something like that, because Jefferson was just taking office. So the country was pretty young at that point. And Marbury versus Madison will actually play a short clip to explain it, but essentially it had to do with Adams trying to Adams was a Federalist. Jefferson was taking over. He was an anti-Federalist or a classical liberal, and it seemed like Adams just kind of wanted to piss him off. But we'll play this short clip to explain it in very simple terms. And that's not it. That's Eric B. and Rakim.
The presidential election of 1800 was one of the most contentious in our young nation's history. Federalist President John Adams fought for re-election, but it became clear that the anti-Federalists, led by Democratic Republican and Vice President Thomas Jefferson, would take the office. Meanwhile, in an effort to preserve the influence of the party, the Federalist-led Congress passed the Judiciary Act of 1801, now known as the Midnight Judges Act, which reorganized the federal judiciary, and the District of Columbia organized.
So basically, what Adams wanted to do, because he was a bitter baby, I guess, well, he is from Massachusetts, he and all those people from Massachusetts that are offended, I grew up in Massachusetts. I lived in Las Vegas for 15 years. But he did it, what it seems like is he did it on purpose just to piss off Jefferson. So he hired all of these judges last minute, literally the night before, from what I understand, where they had to go, and I don't know what their process was, like give them their judges' documents or whatever. And they weren't even able to accomplish it. Another thing, and it mentions it, is John Marshall was secretary of something. He was the one who was giving these out. He was also the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. I don't know if he became the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court the next day or he was both at the same time. But we'll continue this.
Act, both of which created dozens of new judgeships and justiceships. Adams spent the next few weeks, his last in office, appointing dozens of Federalists. These appointees became known as the Midnight Judges and the Midnight Justices of the Peace. The group obtained wholesale approval from Congress on March 2nd. The commissions were signed by Adams and sealed by the Secretary.
And just to add, of course, Federalists who are more in support of the stronger federal government would want more federal judges because more control to the federal government.
Of State on March 3rd. The last remaining step was for the commissions to be physically delivered to the appointees by the Secretary of State. Who was Adams's Secretary of State? John Marshall, who had already been appointed Chief Justice of the Supreme Court.
Okay, so that's where, as I said, John Marshall was a secretary. I didn't know which secretary was, but Secretary of State. And as I had said, he was appointed to Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. So I don't know if it actually took effect literally the next day is when he moved out of Secretary of State because Adams was leaving and moved into the Chief Justice spot.
Marshall was unable to deliver all of the commissions before Jefferson was sworn in the next day by Marshall himself in his role as Chief Justice. The undelivered commissions were still in Marshall's office when James Madison, the new Secretary of State, took office. Jefferson told Madison not to deliver the commissions. William Marbury, whom Adams had appointed Justice of the Peace of the District of Columbia, was one of the appointees who had not received his commission. Congress had authorized the United States Supreme Court to issue writs of mandamus under the Judiciary Act of 1789. So Marbury brought suit against Madison in the United States Supreme Court under its original jurisdiction to compel Madison to deliver the commission. Writing for a unanimous court, Chief Justice Marshall first concluded that Marbury had been lawfully appointed and confirmed as Justice of the Peace, and therefore had a right to his commission. Marshall went on to say that Marbury was entitled to redress under the law for the deprivation of that right. Unfortunately for Marbury, however, the court refused to issue the writ. The court held that the section of the Judiciary Act of 1789 conferring original jurisdiction to issue writs of mandamus on the Supreme Court was unconstitutional. The court found that this provision was at odds with Article 3 of the Constitution, which specifically lays out the Supreme Court's original jurisdiction, though it empowers Congress to pass laws related to the court's appellate jurisdiction. In a landmark move, the court recognized its power of judicial review, that is, the court's authority to review laws and legislative acts to determine whether they pass constitutional muster. The court found that the act was unconstitutional because it sought to expand the Supreme Court's original jurisdiction beyond that granted by the Constitution. The court declined to exercise jurisdiction over Marbury's claim. This case established the Supreme Court's power of judicial review, a function so central to the role of the judiciary in modern jurisprudence that the following quote from Marshall's opinion is carved on the wall of the Supreme Court building. The quote goes, "It is emphatically the province and duty of the judicial department to say what the law is." Though judicial review was not a new idea, this case firmly ensconced the principle in American law. Marbury v. Madison remains one of the most important cases in American jurisprudence. If you found this video helpful,
promoting the ideas of true freedom and liberty, nonpartisan liberty for all radio with Dave Bourne.
So essentially what had happened there was, to summarize, is that the Supreme Court made their decision. So before this had happened, the Supreme Court didn't have the right to rule something unconstitutional. But what they did was, on their own, without it being written into the Constitution, Marshall said, okay, and it was probably to fuck with Jefferson, as I assume he was a Federalist because he was Secretary of State under Adams. So what happened was he used there was a law passed, I guess some Judiciary Act of 1789. The details are really irrelevant for what we're talking about. But he ruled that based on Article 3 of the Constitution that law was unconstitutional. Therefore, he ruled in favor of Madison. So, and Tom Hartman had actually brought this up on the clip we played yesterday, that Jefferson was kind of screwed because he didn't want the Supreme Court to have this power. He didn't want 9 people to be able to make laws with the majority rule. He had thought, and he was wrong in this as well, that you just vote the people out. You vote out Congress and have them repeal the law. As we all know, that's not going to happen. So there should have been some other way to validate, or some other type of branch, or, I mean, there should have been something else that didn't give power to that amount of people, because obviously look at the impact it's having today. Now, it had a lot of impact back then too, not in this specific case. But Jefferson, looking at the case, and let's go back to the case for a minute. So he didn't want all these judges appointed. Adams said, I'm going to appoint all these judges. Marshall didn't give out all the commissions to all these judges. So one of the judges who I guess didn't get their judgeship. Now, I don't know if none of them got them or all of them got them except for the few that he didn't get to hand out or what. But one of them said, fuck that, I want to be a judge. So he filed suit. So the suit came against the government, the Secretary of State, Madison. So Madison and Jefferson had won the case. What Adams did was unconstitutional. So I'm not 100% sure if all of the judges, which I think it was, all the judges were thrown out. They weren't judges that Adams had appointed. So he won. But what he won was worse than what he had lost, because in the process, what had happened was the Supreme Court set precedent. Why precedent is so important, I don't know. But if you look at cases, everything is based off precedent, which means essentially old cases. So and I've heard they have this book on, that they go through that has all of these older cases and things like that. What's funny is, if you look at something like jury nullification, it should be all over it when you look at precedent. Although people are found in contempt of court for bringing it up. And for those who don't know, jury nullification means you can vote not guilty based on the law. So say you're a jury in a case where someone is charged with possession of a drug and you think that drug should be legal, you can vote not guilty just because of the law. And obviously there's precedent for that. So they only pick what they want. They pick and choose. Now, the other side of this is obviously that what if the Supreme Court did not rule on cases, whether they were constitutional or not? How would that have affected the country the past 200 years? Or about 212 or something like that. That's where because without that, they created a constitution really with no way to enforce the supposed Bill of Rights that you have. Who's going to enforce it? I mean, essentially, you can try to enforce it yourself via having a militia, and that's kind of how it should be in a sense. Not exactly like that, but I think you should be able to enforce your own rights. But there wasn't a government agency. What Jefferson wanted was the people. And that sounds great in theory. Now, if what he meant by the people was that, hey, if they violate your rights, you can fucking shoot them, then I'm fine with that. But what I guess it said in the Federalist Papers 78, and the Federalist Papers were just to convince people to adopt the Constitution. They didn't mean anything. They weren't law. But that he wanted Congress to control that, essentially. So if a law was passed that was unconstitutional, he wanted the people to vote Congress out and get them to change that law. And as we all know, maybe that would have worked back then, but it ain't working now. And we know that. So the Constitution not only was a flawed document from the beginning, in more than one way. I mean, we're just talking about one specific aspect of the Constitution. But it was flawed in many ways because it's a piece of paper. And you got to look at the fact that it can't stop. There's no teeth in it. There's no nothing. And you can't put teeth in a piece of paper. Government rules by a gun. They rule by missiles. They rule by nuclear weapons. What stops you? Now, most people, what stops them from murder and just punching somebody in the face and just doing bad things to people is their conscience and the fact that they just wouldn't do that. And that's why those are pretty much natural laws, and those are laws that interfere with other people's freedoms. But what stops the majority of people, not everybody, is the fact that they just wouldn't do that because they understand, look, I have to respect other people's freedom if I truly want freedom. Now, what stops people from doing all these other things that don't hurt anybody and don't hurt anybody's property is the fact that the government has all these weapons and all of these armed men that will come down and physically come after you. And tomorrow we're going to talk about the Bundy case where they finally arrested Cliven Bundy about almost 2 years later. So we'll talk about that. And that was a case that I wouldn't say happy about, but I looked at as progress. I looked at it as progress because nobody got hurt, but a group of people were able to stand up, and they were able to stand up for something that the government was doing wrong, and the government backed down. And they had to do it with arms. Arms are, people got to remember, or people don't got to do anything. I hate when I do that, like people got to do this or got to do that. You don't have to do anything. But I think that people should remember the fact that a gun is not just about the actual firing and using of a gun. Now, you got to be prepared. I don't know what idiot said this, because somebody was talking about this is, oh, when you pull a gun out, you're supposed to shoot somebody. Some idiot said that. I think it was Cantwell or somebody. To be honest, if it wasn't you, Chris, I apologize. But I thought that's who said it, or somebody said it to him. I know he was there when the conversation took place, which is a host of a independent radio show in New Hampshire who I've talked about before. But he was actually on the show before. But that was when he was what I call normal. Not that he's not normal, but I don't know what's going on with that guy currently. But anyway, the saying is that you have to, if you pull out a gun, this is how much, I guess some people they move somewhere where they can get a gun, and then they all of a sudden they're gun experts. And I'm not saying I'm a gun expert, but I'm like mid-level. I've, read about guns. I've had a gun since 2002, at least illegal ones. And I know enough about them, but I'm not like some expert on guns. I would say on a scale of 1 to 10, it's like a 6. I mean, I have a range. It just expired. I got to pay that and renew it. But I have I'm a member of a range that I go to and whatnot. But the saying is that when you pull a gun, you have to be prepared to shoot somebody. Now, that doesn't mean that you have to shoot them, though. That's the whole point. You have to be prepared to shoot them. You can't pull a gun with the intent that no matter what, you're not going to use it. Now you pull the gun with the possibility that you may have to use it. And if you got to use it, you got to use it. But it all depends on what happens in the situation. You just don't pull a gun and start shooting unless you're in a situation where it calls for that, where somebody has a gun on you and somehow you're able to get yours out and shoot them before they can shoot you. But the ideal situation is to not have to use your gun. And that's the difference, too, I think, between people that not know more about guns, but just view them for what they really are. That they, the type of people like that have a gun collection or have more than one gun and don't question somebody who has 20 or 30 guns because they understand they're collecting guns and that there's different calibers. They want to shoot different types of guns. Different guns have different power. They are used for different things. So all of these things, you understand that, and you understand that the last thing you want to do is use that gun. It's like somebody who is a fighter, a true fighter, who the last thing he really wants to do, a true tough guy, the last thing he wants to do is get into a fight. But if he has to, he will. But he'd rather walk away and have somebody talk shit than get into a fight because he knows it's not worth it. And it's not, hurting somebody is not what he's out there to do. It's about defending yourself and defending your life. So that situation, I thought, was a great thing because it showed people standing up for themselves, and in the same process, nobody got hurt. Not the people there, not the Bureau of Land Management, because despite what people may think about me, I don't want to see police or law enforcement or any of these people get hurt. Now, some of them I'd like to see just get their ass kicked. But, I mean, I don't want to see them get permanently injured or killed or whatever. And, maybe there's some exceptions, like if there's a cop that's actually going around killing a bunch of people or raping and, but I mean, in general, I don't want to see these guys get hurt neither. I don't want to see anybody get hurt. But you get to situations where you have to stand up for yourself. So we'll be talking about that tomorrow, but it's sad that he's now been arrested and charged with conspiracy and all of these things. So I'm actually glad I didn't go down there because they took license plates and all that stuff. And I thought of going down there, and I'll just leave it at that. I don't know what would have happened. Well, I know what would have happened, but I don't know if I would have been one of those people out there with a gun and been charged with something later. So I think looking at it now, it's good that I didn't go down there. But the only reason I didn't go is because I got up at like 2:00 that day, and that was the day that had happened. And then after that, it was over. But going back to the Supreme Court, it not only shows another hole in the Constitution, But it shows that once you give people power, the Chief Justice just said, you know what, fuck it, I'm going to rule this way. Now, where it says you have to follow precedent or precedents, I don't know. But that's how things are followed. Now, from what I understand and talking to Ken, who's going to be on in about 25 minutes, that we are under maritime law. It's one of those things where I don't know if that is one of the sovereign citizen type things or that is just a fact that people admit to. And that's where bar comes from, and it actually stands for something. But what he did was essentially say that, hey, we're going to judge the constitutionality of laws. Now, you can look at certain cases and say, well, what would have happened if you didn't have the Supreme Court? But you take the good with the bad. There's plenty of Supreme Court decisions that were bad, and you're looking at something where the process in itself is bad, but they don't have any other process. It's not only bad, it's horrible, because you have to, but it's the same thing with anything else. You have to make sure, which you can't make sure, but you have to hope that the people that are on this court or in Congress or the president or in the cabinet or wherever, whatever the issue might be, are people of honor that will do the right thing. And that is not the case, unfortunately. So you have now the Supreme Court essentially making laws, because they're not directly making laws, but by ruling a law unconstitutional, they know that if it gets challenged, the same thing will happen. So once a law has been ruled unconstitutional or vice versa constitutional, and there's been laws that have been ruled constitutional for stupid fucking reasons, and I think it was actually Scalia who wrote this opinion. I'll have to look at it. The checkpoints for DUIs, that he actually wrote that the safety aspect of it was more important than the fact that it does violate your rights. And that's crazy. And that's not his job. And this is a guy who, if you had listened to yesterday's show and heard the interview from 60 Minutes, was he tries to interpret, this is what he said, he tries to interpret what the founding fathers meant when they wrote the Constitution. Now, let's look at something else. If you look at the Constitution, it's not too long, nor does it really have any real laws in it outside the Bill of Rights. It has the structure of government where, okay, the Senate set up this way and they have this power, and the House of Representatives is set up this way, and the president has these powers, and blah, blah, blah. And that's really what it is. I mean, it's a governing document. It's a document that was created for a government, and then within it, then it has what was called the Bill of Rights, the first 10 amendments, and then they had went through and added, I believe now 27. Maybe there's more, because I remember 26, and then I had heard later like, oh, there's 27, and I'm like, oh fuck, where did that one come from? And actually, I think it was, I don't know if it was the 27th or the 28th, but there was an amendment from 1789 or something that was passed in like the 90s, and I remember that was when I really wasn't paying attention to much of anything when it came to government, because I was frustrated with a lot of things. I would yell at my TV because, as I've mentioned before, the way I am now is not much different than how I've ever been, with the exception of I was more of an establishment libertarian where I believed in limited government, I would say. However, in certain areas, very limited. Like, I remember when I was 19, I had written out this thing, and it went through what the police should be able to do. And essentially, I wrote that the police shouldn't be able to pull you over. They shouldn't be able to search your car. The police shouldn't be able to go in your house, whether they have a warrant or not. I mean, I was always pretty hardcore with what I thought the rights of the government should be. And when I say limited, I mean limited. And a lot of what I got caught up in, where I got away from it, to be honest, and this is kind of funny, is I was more out trying to meet girls and focusing all my time and energy on that. And I finally got to a point where I would watch, Fox News, I would watch MSNBC, I would watch CNN, I would watch all of this shit because I always believed in freedom. And when I've said this before, I cannot remember a time when I didn't think drugs should be legal. I cannot remember a time when I didn't think guns should be legal. I can't. So as soon as I knew exactly what they were, I thought they should be legal. And that may be some of the influence of my father. I don't know. But I didn't know what a libertarian is. I didn't really think about it, but I would definitely say that if I look back on things now, that at minimum I was an establishment libertarian, but I was probably even more hardcore than that. Although, again, I believed in some kind of government. And then as I was saying, I would watch all these and yell at my TV. If I was watching the Republican thing, I would, yell at them about the stuff, the side of the Democrats and vice versa, because usually it would depend on the issue. If it was an issue that had to do with, freedom or something like that, is where they would both piss me off. And I finally got to a point where I was like, I'm not watching this shit anymore. This is bullshit. This is brainwashing. And this is pretty much all they put on there on purpose. I remember even in college, I did a presentation for a class. And there used to be a show called Crossfire, and I think they brought it back recently. And then I think they took it off the air again. But all it was the Democrats yelling at the Republicans. And that's how I viewed things. And I did a presentation on how they just take the Republicans, just defend all the Republicans, and the Democrats just defend all the Democrats. And they're just full of shit. And they have their platform, and they just defend their own platform, and they don't believe in anything, and they're just a bunch of liars and whatever. And one of the things I wanted to do, and I told this story before too, I actually wanted to talk about how guns are demonized in the media, because growing up they were, especially in Boston, but everywhere, because in rap music they would bleep out any word for gun. they would talk about them as if they were evil. So it was hard to, especially growing up there, most people, see, this is kind of what they did, is most people that were attracted to guns were bad people just based on the fact that they identified guns as bad. And over there it would be like, well, what would you want a gun for? What do you need a gun for? And that was the type of how people thought over there. Plus, it was really hard to get one as well. But going back to the Constitution. So in my example saying, you know, to defend that right of the Second Amendment, where would you go? Well, they never really thought of that, or they did, but they never actually put it into the Constitution. So the Supreme Court just said, okay, we're going to do this. And we're going to just, you know, make things up as we go along. And I'm sure I could go through the Constitution and go through history and find so many different things that were violated, that they just made up, that were unconstitutional. And of course, the Supreme Court only has a certain number, and the Supreme Court is totally politically biased anyway. So you have that as well. I'm trying to like text now and talk, and that's where my multitasking skills are not the best. It's kind of strange how different people have different types of skills. Like, I'm great at multitasking on the computer and doing like other things. I can't think of something right away that comes to mind, but like I can do all these things on the computer and go back and forth and, you know, stuff like that. But when I'm on the air, it's really hard for me. Like, if somebody calls me and I'm trying to look at what they said, or I'm trying to do something else that's not pertaining to the show, you know, besides going through my notes or something like that, that's when you could probably tell, because I'll get quiet for a minute, or I may not get off topic, but not maybe make as much sense. Not that I won't make any sense, but that I won't make the point that I was trying to make exactly. So, which of course sucks. But anyway, it's about that time to take a break. I think we covered everything that I wanted to cover, besides the whole party thing and people having parties for Trump and Bernie Sanders. And I don't think, I'm just going to say this before we take a break. I don't think that, at least that I can remember, that anybody had actually been this excited about the candidates. And it's kind of scary, because one, you got a socialist, an admitted socialist, and you got fucking Mr. Celebrity Billionaire. And it really, to me, shows the dumbing down of the U.S. I mean, that's how I would view it. I look at it as a kind of dumbing down. Like, is it serious? Is this a joke? But then I think about the way I look at the other people running for president. I look at them totally differently as well. because they're a bunch of jokes also. I mean, it's all a fucking rigged game, as we had talked about last week. It's a rigged game. It's probably Hillary, who they already had decided, and who they may have even decided 8 years ago. So who knows? But speaking of that, we will. Here is Donald Trump's top 20 insults, and before that, let me just play the other clip about Marbury versus Madison. Actually, that's kind of long, so let me just play Donald Trump's 20 insults, and we can play the other clip later, probably at the end of the show. But so here is Donald Trump's top 20 insults, and when we come back, we will be joined by Ken Schortgen of the Daily Economist. Check him out at thedailyeconomist.com, and be sure to stay tuned, because there's a lot going on in the economy, and Ken always has important information for you. So we'll be right back after this. NonpartisanLibertyForAll.com. If you'd like to call in, 702-470-7664. That's 702-470-7664. Or you can Skype in at Nonpartisan Liberty for all one word, and send a contact request. All the information is at NonpartisanLibertyForAll.com, the phone number and the Skype address. So we'll be right back after this. Stay tuned for Donald Trump's top 20 insults. Jeez, I would think he had a lot more than that.
Politicians are all talk, no action. The politicians are going to destroy this country. They're weak and they're ineffective. I watch as politicians are trying to claim that, and that's okay with me. You know, they're all talk, no action, so they won't do anything anyway, just so you understand. I've watched the politicians. I've dealt with them all my life. They will never make America great again. They don't even have a chance. They're controlled fully by the lobbyists, by the donors, and by the special interests. These politicians, they run and they run and they win, and sometimes they lose and they keep running. That's all they do is run. Most of them don't know what they're doing. They just run. I just hate to see when people don't have common sense, don't have an understanding of what's going on, or perhaps don't want to know. Maybe it's campaign contributions, maybe it's special interests, maybe it's lobbyists. But for some reason, some people don't get it, and I don't think they'll be in office much longer. I really mean that. We have very stupid people in our country negotiating for us, and we have leaders that don't know what they're doing. I respect Mexico, but their leaders are too smart for our leaders, because we have stupid leaders, okay? You know, free trade, I believe in it. Totally. I'm a free trader. The problem with free trade is you need smart people on our side. When you don't have smart people, free trade is not a good thing. Free trade can be wonderful if you have smart people. But we have people that are stupid. We have people that aren't smart. And we have people that are controlled by special interests. And it's just not going to work. You can win against China if you're smart. But our people don't have a clue. We give state dinners to the heads of China. I say, why are you doing state dinners for them? They're ripping us left and right. Just take them to McDonald's and go back to the negotiating table. Seriously. Somebody's doing a bad job. It's corruption. It's massive corruption. It's massive incompetence. And the people are really being treated like third-class citizens. We have incompetent politicians, not only the president. Obama would get creamed if he ran again. I call Obama the 5-for-1 president. We get Bergdahl, they get 5 guys that they dream of, okay? We get a traitor, a no-good, rotten traitor like Bergdahl. And they get 5 killers that they most wanted in the whole world, who are right now back on the battlefield trying to kill everybody, including us. Our president doesn't have a clue. He's a bad negotiator. I think they made a mistake, but not with Obama, because he's weak and he's ineffective and he's not respected. When President Obama was elected, I said, well, the one thing I think he'll do well, I think he'll be a great cheerleader for the country. He's not a leader, that's true. You're right about that. But he wasn't a cheerleader. He's actually a negative force. He's been a negative force. You have this guy, Lindsey Graham, a total lightweight. Here's a guy in the private sector, he couldn't get a job, believe me. Lindsey Graham, your senator. What a stiff. What a stiff. By the way, he's registered 0 in the poll. 0. I couldn't care less about Lindsey Graham. He's registered at, I think, 0 in the poll. I don't know if it's the right number. Let's try it. 202-228-0292. I don't know. Maybe it's, it's 3-4 years ago, so maybe it's an old number. 202-228-0292. So, I don't know, give it a shot. Your local politician, he won't fix anything, but at least he'll talk to you. He actually probably seems to me not as bright, honestly, as Rick Perry. I think Rick Perry probably is smarter than Lindsey Graham, but what do I know? I see Rick Perry the other day. He put glasses on so people will think he's smart. And it just doesn't work. People can see through the glasses.
Yeah, but Rick Perry, honestly, I don't think he even understands what it means.
I tweeted that Rick Perry should have to have an IQ test before getting on the debate stage.
I think Rick Perry did a terrible job as the governor of Texas, where the border security was terrible.
Hillary Clinton was the worst Secretary of State in the history of the United States. Hillary was the worst. Hillary Clinton's going to be a horrible president. I think Hillary would be a terrible president. She was the worst Secretary of State in the history of our nation. Why would she be a good president? I think she'd be a terrible president. Rubio, he was unable to answer the question. Is Iraq a good thing or a bad thing? He didn't know. He couldn't answer the question. How are these people going to lead us? How are we going to go back and make it great again? We can't. They don't have a clue. Jeb Bush, let's say he's president. The last thing this country needs is another Bush. We've had it with the Bushes. You look at somebody like Jeb Bush. It took him 5 days to give a proper answer on Iraq. He was changing his answer every day. How is somebody like that going to negotiate? The poll just came out, and I'm tied with Jeb Bush. And I said, oh, that's too bad. How can I be tied with this guy? He's terrible. He's terrible. Bush is totally in favor of Common Core. I don't see how he can possibly get the nomination. He's weak on immigration. He's in favor of Common Core. How the hell can you vote for this guy? You just can't do it. I'm not a fan of Jeb Bush, because Jeb Bush is in favor of Common Core, and he's weak on immigration. Those are two bad things. Jeb Bush will never take us to the promised land. He doesn't have it. I supported him. He lost. He let us down. But, he lost. So I never liked him as much after that, because I don't like losers. And he's the guy. I mean, he's supposed to be doing it. And I see him on television all the time, and he's always talking, but nothing gets done. He's a war hero. 5.5 years. He's a war hero because he was captured. I like people that weren't captured, okay? I hate to tell you. Do you agree with that? He's a war hero because he was captured. Sixty, 70% of the political media is really, really dishonest. Because the press are liars. They're terrible people. They're terrible people. The press is very, very dishonest. And I think people are wise to the press. Because those people, many of them, not all, some are great, but many of them are very dishonest people, meaning the press. Very dishonest. Very dishonest. The people don't trust you, and the people don't trust the media.
That there are, for immigrants on the whole,
Come on, try getting it out. Try getting it out.
I'll get it out.
I mean, I don't know if you're going to put this on television, but you don't even know what you're talking about. Try getting it out. Go ahead. Reverend Al is a con man. tells people I'm going to picket you if you don't give. I mean, this guy is a con man. How stupid are our leaders? How stupid are these politicians to allow this to happen?
Stay in the race. Just stop being a jackass.
I don't think he represents the Republican Party, and his views are way out of the mainstream of what Republicans think.
Donald Trump doesn't represent the Republican Party. I think his remarks were offensive. As an individual who has worn the uniform of this country, I was highly offended what Donald Trump said about John McCain.
I think the comments he's made has allowed people that don't want to have a debate or talk about illegal immigration to distract from the very serious debate on hand.
To make these extraordinarily ugly kind of comments is not reflective of the Republican Party. Trump is wrong on this.
Donald Trump owes every American veteran, and in particular John McCain, an apology.
The American people deserve better. Certainly presidential debates deserve better.
You are listening to Nonpartisan Liberty for All Radio with your host, Dave Bourne. Call in at 702-470-7664 or Skype in, username Nonpartisan Liberty for All.
And we are back after Mr. Trump's insults. You know, I can't stand Donald Trump, to be honest. I really can't, because I think he's an arrogant fuck, and I've talked about how I could never stand Trump. Even back when he did his show, he's arrogant. He thinks he's so great. He wants that celebrity status. But at the same time, all these other motherfuckers are just a bunch of little bitches, like Rubio and Kasich and the Bush. Although I love me some Bush. But they're all just a bunch of little bitches. They're in some ways worse because they're like, oh, you disrespected John McCain or this or that. And so fuck them too. But anyway, I was gonna looking for some segue into bringing Ken on, but I was gonna be speaking of fuck you, like, because that wouldn't work. But speaking of the presidential election and things that are going on in the world, that's a good segue. We have Ken Schortgen of the Daily Economist with us. Thanks, Ken, for joining us as always.
Pleasure to be here.
So before,
and I got something for Donald Trump.
Okay, cool. Because I was going to ask you before we get into what we're going to talk about today. I wanted to get a couple of your opinion on Donald Trump and on the presidential race in general.
Yeah, let me. Have you seen the movie The Big Short yet?
Yeah, you ask me that every week. I saw it at the theater.
Well, there's a portion of the movie for anybody who's listened. And,
you love that movie, don't you?
Well, not as much as Margin.
Did you see it 3 times yet? Because I know you said you saw it twice at the theater so far.
Oh, no. Actually, I didn't see it at the theater at all. I saw it on a free site. But
well, that sucks. Because, they have this theater near me now that has it has like the recliners and the waitresses, and you can order alcohol, and it's just like I love going to that theater. So basically whatever's playing there, the reason I think I saw it wasn't necessarily that I didn't want to see it or I did want to see it. I kind of did, but I might have seen something over it, but it happened to be playing there. And they only have like 4 movies playing there because they don't have a lot of theaters, and they like to have a showing like every hour. So pretty much, they use one movie might take up like a couple, 2-3 theaters. But anyway, But
yeah,
sorry,
so they
go
make
ahead.
their money on the atmosphere and on the concessions much more than the
Yeah,
actual movie.
it's worth it, man. I mean, it's more comfortable than like being at my house.
Well, I got a theater that's near me over here in Litchfield Park, and the great thing about it is it's hidden in this little shopping center, and I could go on the opening night of Star Wars, and there wouldn't be a line, and I would have plenty of time for seats. That's the one great thing I love about that theater is
nobody goes there, or
nobody really knows about it because maybe 5 miles away is this massive AMC multiplex, and it's in a big mall area, so that's where everybody goes. That's why I'd rather go to this little old one.
How do they make money?
That's a great question. But they've been there since the 70s, so they get enough people. But I can go someplace and it's not crowded. That's what I love about it.
Yeah, I don't like the whole crowded thing either. But this place, to be honest, is the same thing. It's not. It one time it was crowded, and we got like tickets in the second row, and I couldn't do it, and I was able to change movies. It was that bad. I had to change movies and get a further back row because that second row was like fuck. But yeah, usually it's not crowded, which is cool. But
yeah, I go in there and I want to get the first row of the first tier up because that's usually where you get the most leg room.
Yeah, well, this place has like leg room just everywhere, like it's
but
built
I'm not
that
in
way.
Vegas.
Cool.
I don't have the
well, it's
the
not
experience.
It's not even Vegas, man. It's because this is in Summerlin, which is part of Las Vegas, but it's like the snobby area, and they had just built it in the past year. So this is a pretty new theater. So, but it's not on the Strip or anything like that. But sorry, you were gonna say something about Trump.
Yeah, if you remember from the movie Jared Vennet, the Ryan Gosling character,
yeah,
who played the banker from Deutsche Bank, who was trying to talk the world's angriest hedge fund into buying credit default swaps and shorting.
Steve Carell's hedge fund.
Okay, well, anyway, I remember going through there and I was listening to the little discussion that Vinny and Mark Baum had immediately after Jared Vennet got done, selling his product. And I said, Jared Vennet is exactly Donald Trump.
You said that last time.
Oh, did I read this already?
Yeah.
Well, that's exactly, Donald Trump.
I don't see it because I remember when you said it last time, and I'm like, I didn't see it. Maybe it's because I saw the Ryan Gosling character, knowing Ryan Gosling, and looking at him more as Ryan Gosling than the character he was playing. You know what I mean? It's just like Tom Cruise is always like Tom Cruise in every movie. Like Ryan Gosling, I'm not saying he's not a good actor, but it's kind of, I don't know that he can get out of this certain kind of, it's him.
Here's the thing. You're asking me about Trump, and this is exactly, imagine Jared Vennet is Trump, and Steve Carell and Vinny and the rest of the gang, they're voters, okay? And they're against the system. They're against banks. They hate the banks. They think the whole thing is rigged. So they look at Jared Vennet, and they're discussing what he has to offer. Imagine Jared Vennet just got done with a speech, and they're talking about it. Vinny looks at Steve Carell and says, I don't like this. He's playing us. He's got too much skin in the game, and he's dumping his position. And Steve Carell, Mark Baum, goes, what if he's right? Vinny goes, you want him to be right. Yes, I do. The banks have given us 25% interest rates on credit cards. They've screwed us on student loans where you can never get out from under them. And this guy, Donald Trump, Jared Vennet, walks into my office and says, these same banks got greedy, they lost track of the market, and I can profit off their stupidity? F yeah, I want him to be right. And Vinny goes, why don't you hate this guy? He's everything you taught us not to trust. Mark Baum goes, I can't hate him. He's so transparent in his self-interest that I kind of respect him. Would I buy a car from him? No.
I wish
Is he
I
right
had
about the mortgage market?
I wish I had the clip in front of me from last fucking show because you said the exact same thing.
Exactly, but we didn't get a chance to delve into it.
But sorry, go ahead.
Is that the public is looking at Donald Trump, and they're not looking at Donald Trump because they really trust him. They're looking at Donald Trump because he's the only bloody non-politician who's telling the world, telling America what is wrong. Okay? No politician in the past gets elected by saying, this is wrong. America is down. You know, they just lie about everything, or they react to each other. Now, Donald Trump, of course, tears down people. That's his shtick.
Right. He's an ass.
Right. But the thing about it is Donald Trump is the perfect person for the perfect time, just like the credit default swap is the perfect instrument at the perfect time for a housing bubble that was about to collapse. Donald Trump is about Donald Trump, the brand.
But I almost look at him as a joke, to be honest, because
he is a joke.
Because of the whole, sorry to interrupt, but because of the whole shtick and because of all the bullshit. Now he's talking about suing Ted Cruz because of his commercial. He's just like, the guy himself is just like a bad cliche. Like he's, Mr. I got to be the best at everything.
But see, you miss the psychology of this.
See, Ross Perot was similar in some ways.
The thing about Ross Perot,
but he wasn't an ass.
He had the see. You see it as being an ass.
Well, I was a kid at the time, but
Ross Perot had no charisma. He was this Texas. Texas.
I got this graph over here, and we're going to take this graph over here, and we're going to show you how from this graph. I remember Dana Carvey used to do both Bush and him in the debates on Saturday Night Live. It used to be, I forget who played Clinton. It might have been like Phil Hartman, but there was Clinton, and then Carvey was both Bush, older Bush, and Ross Perot in the debates on Saturday Night Live. They would just, pre-film it.
Exactly. Now, here's the thing. You talk about, calling him a clown, and he's going to sue Ted Cruz, and you go out. Well, here's the thing. Because this is actually a genius move, because he is attacking all of these candidates, and they're not even spending their time talking about issues. All they're doing is talking about Trump.
Well, there's a show on Showtime. It's called like The Circus, and it's about the debates and the presidential election, essentially. Now, they showed the Democrats, but there's not really anything going on because you only got two of them. And if you look at it's fucked up because I looked at this today. I looked at the votes, right? The actual delegates. So Bernie Sanders, I think, has 32 and Hillary has 34, or it might be the other way around. But then you look at super delegates. Hillary has like 5,000 and Bernie Sanders has 30.
Yeah, but there's not that many. But I see what you're saying.
Because you can win based on super delegates.
Exactly. See, that's the way. But this is why President or George Washington talked about the in his farewell address. He talked about not having political parties because the political the candidate for the political party. But see, there's something very interesting. Okay, and this is what stands out to me in the Donald Trump rant session that you had last break. How many of these people, he's not a Republican. He's not what Republicans stand for. Well, you know what? The whole country despises Republicans. That's why he's 20 points up in the poll, because he's not a Republican. He's running under the Republican banner. And you know what? Like I said, the charade that went on when he met with the Republican National Committee and he signed that pledge that he would not do a third party.
Yeah.
Yeah, you know why he did that? Because of how the Republican Party destroyed and cheated Ron Paul the previous election by not allowing his primary delegates in there, by closing down the thing to independents. They totally made it. Ron Paul won Iowa, but they cheated him out of it. Okay, that would have if Ron Paul had won the first leg of that, Imagine what it would have done with his grassroots and all the people, because he had a vision.
Rick Santorum won Iowa one year too.
Yeah, but where's Rick Santorum this year?
Rick Santorum is a religious freak.
Gone. Christie's gone.
But what I'm saying is, people have won Iowa, and it didn't mean anything.
The key thing about Bernie Sanders and Donald Trump is they are personifications of the fact that the American people have had enough of the Republicans, the Democrats, the conservatives, the liberals, the system. Okay, they've had enough, and they're willing to accept a jackass as president in defiance for the establishment. And think about this. Donald Trump, if there's anything that is important to Donald Trump, it's his brand. Okay. Donald Trump is running for president not because he cares for the country, not because he wants to change things, but because from day one, and it goes back to a Playboy interview that he did in like the late 1990s, it's all been about the Trump brand. And he says, the Trump brand will continue going until the day I am in a coffin.
Right. He's going to call the White House the Trump House.
Right. So what is the ultimate accomplishment as an American legacy for the Trump brand?
Right. We talked about that before that.
Exactly.
Right. President. But
so if you take a look at the individuals who are running, well, you know what? The one candidate that I thought was decent, Rand Paul, he's gone. Everybody else, it's crapshoot. Who cares? Jeb Bush is not. The thing about it is when George Bush Jr. ran, he ran against some pretty pathetic challengers. Jeb Bush does not even have the charisma of his brother. He's just a little Florida governor who has the wrong name at the wrong time, and he will not get the nomination, period. Ben Carson's been shot down because he exaggerates too much.
Well, he doesn't know anything when it comes to...
He got called to the carpet.
Government. He can tell you how to do brain surgery, but he doesn't have enough knowledge of anything else, really. And we're in a obvious TV world where how you come off means a lot too. And
now you just hit a second
he
thing.
Comes off like he's going to put you to sleep.
More people watch reality TV shows. The Kardashians is the number one viewed show on TV. Americans are into reality TV. And who is the best reality actor out there?
Well, Donald Trump.
Donald Trump, pure and simple. So all you got to do is look at the fact that Bernie Sanders is getting a lot of money from grassroots contributions, and he spent $10 million in Nevada doing ads. Last month, Trump spent only $2 million of his own money because he is so outrageous.
They give him all this press.
Exactly. These he knows
there's no such thing as bad press.
He knows the prostitutes that are the press, and the press needs headlines. They need people watching, eyeballs on the screen, and everybody wants to see what Trump's going to say or do next.
See, I honestly could care less. If it wasn't for the show, I wouldn't even be watching any of this shit.
To sum all this up, the government and the country is already past the point of no return, so why not have a clown in the presidency?
Yeah, it's just it's like it's all a big joke. But I mean, it's already determined whoever the president's going to be, and
I think it's different this time. I think they are running scared. This is why the Republican Party is doing everything in its path.
Well, the Republicans, but I still think that Hillary most likely will end up as the president.
Hillary won't make it. Let me tell you something. They're making a meme now of Hillary with that song "Who Let the Dogs Out," and they're interceding with every time that Hillary barks or shrieks.
Yeah, I know, because she did. I didn't hear it, but I heard about it. But
if she gets into a pissing contest with the Donald, she will be crucified. she'll probably have another stroke and fall down.
If I honestly think it's at the point where they have electronic machines for a reason. So if they need to rig an election, they'll rig an election. So bottom line is, and Hillary's going to get the nomination because of the super delegates.
I'm going to throw something out there. Hillary's not going to get the nomination, and neither is Bernie Sanders. Hillary is going to be indicted.
You think they're actually going to...
What's going to happen is there's going to be a split convention
she should
on the Democratic side. Well,
but
there's going to be a split convention on the Democratic side, and guess who the delegates are going to elect for their candidate?
Biden.
Exactly. That's why Biden didn't jump in. There's only 2 frickin' Democratic candidates, and there's no incumbents. That's insane. And so Biden is just sitting them, letting them kill each other from attrition, spend all their money, and he's waiting in the wings. And there's a new article. If people want to listen to or read something really fascinating, go check out one by Jeffrey Sachs, Sachs, like Goldman Sachs, Hillary Clinton and the Syrian bloodbath. And it lays out how she should be up for serious treason.
Yeah, no, I've seen a lot of articles about and people talking about it, that people, meaning, talking heads on the radio, that based on what she did, that and based on the FBI's, currently investigating her, that if she was anybody else, she'd be indicted already.
The interesting thing is that Bill is losing his gravitas too, because he's going on the campaign trail from her, and he is helping her absolutely zero.
Well, Obama, I bet you Obama would pardon her anyway.
Not necessarily. You got to remember, Obama and the Clintons hate each other.
Yeah, but just because of the fact that to have a former Secretary of State and to set a precedent.
But you don't understand.
But they set a precedent, just like that's why I think they pardoned Nixon.
But you don't understand the reason she was invited to be Secretary of State. It's because she's
they
a
made a
scapegoat.
deal.
You notice they're not blaming Obama about Benghazi, and they're not blaming Obama about Syria. They're blaming Hillary Clinton. He brought her on. He put a stranglehold on her. Everything was run by Valerie Jarrett, but she is the one who's taking the blame. I mean, to tell the truth, it's masterful. It's not because Obama did this. It's because Axelrod and Jarrett run the White House.
Well, I mean, I guess we'll have to wait and see. I just, I don't see it. I don't see her. I mean, not to say that she shouldn't be indicted.
It's already picked and it's already blah 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 blah. You know what? And it just may be, but in all reality, things are setting up for something even much more different. The Democratic Party is horrified that Bernie Sanders may win this. However, most of Washington despises Hillary Clinton. And from what I've heard from a number of different sources, is that the FBI has so much evidence that they are going to go to the Attorney General and they're going to demand an indictment. If not, then they will do nothing for the Attorney General, Loretta Lynch. They will do nothing. She wants an investigation done. The FBI will just do nothing. It will pretty much hamstring and force her to have to resign because it's like a vote of no confidence.
Well, I've heard that they have a lot of they do have a lot of information, and that they do have enough to indict her easily. And I've heard all that. But
and if you think about it, if the Obama-Clinton hatred is as deep as it goes, how best to do this than to indict her just on the eve of the primary?
I just don't think that government wants to. It would surprise me because I don't think they want to set that precedent that government officials actually go to jail, or maybe they do to use it to show like, oh, look, one of the most beloved, supposedly, presidential candidates and former first ladies is going to jail. So it depends how you look at it. They could be looking at it one way as opposed to another, because they could use it to say, just like I've said before, some idiot said, well, of course, you have freedom, because if you didn't have freedom, you couldn't do your show, like that type of thing. So they need to maintain a certain amount of freedom. So sometimes they throw people under the bus just to show, oh, look, yeah, we go after government people. So if they were to do it, I think that would be the only reason. But anything's possible. But if Biden ends up, if she's out of the race, I don't know who ends up becoming president. And maybe Trump is controllable enough that they would be okay with him being president. I mean, he is an insider. He's a billionaire.
There's another thing to take into consideration too. If the powers that be know that the end is near and the collapse is coming, then why not allow Trump to get in there? And the collapse in history, the collapse will occur on his watch, because we are really, economically at the point, financially at the point that they can't stop this. It's unstoppable. Now, just like Janet Yellen becomes the head of the Federal Reserve at a time when pretty much the Fed is handcuffed and the system is absolutely, collapsing around her, where she is desperate. In December, she raises rates, and then almost instantaneously the next week, other Fed presidents are talking negative rates. That's not confusion. That's chaos. They don't know what they're doing. So Bernanke skates out just before the whole thing, collapses, and Janet Yellen's the placeholder who's going to go down in history of it collapsing on her watch. They could do the same thing with Trump. There is a precedent for this, because in 1928 Herbert Hoover was put in as president. 1929 came the stock market crash, and Herbert Hoover, being a staunch Quaker, did not believe that the government should help anybody, even though the entire thing was collapsing amongst them. And
they had Hoovervilles
Hoovervilles, exactly. The people who lost their homes and were in shanty towns, right. And Hoover, is vilified in history as the president who brought us to the Great Depression, just like FDR, who really didn't do that much, is given the accolades of getting us out of the Depression and winning a war. But Hoover really didn't. The ironic thing is, when historians look back at a lot of the documents in the Hoover Library, much of the things that FDR did, Hoover and his administrators had discussed, but they had turned down. So FDR gets the credit for stealing the plans that Hoover had thought about, but decided that we just need to go through a bust cycle. Let all the toxic debt in that go away. Let the banks who speculate too much die. But the problem is that the entire world was in a global recession. So if you don't have a way to export your goods because nobody's buying from you, then it starts turning in on itself. The farmers pretty much collapsed their prices because they could, during World War I and then after World War I, in the aftermath of Europe, the agriculture and the farmers in the U.S. were really on, in the catbird seat. Everybody wanted wheat. Everybody wanted sugar. Everybody wanted food. So the farmers were buying, getting so much money. They were buying new tractors. They were buying all this stuff. But by the end of the 1920s, Europe had come out of it enough that they weren't buying as much. And all the farmers had all this debt and mortgages because they had expanded their farms and they borrowed from the banks. It's a bust and boom cycle. So, that has precedent of a president who enters into the collapse, and in history he's going to be the one, even though it wasn't his fault. He's going to be one tagged with being the president that brought us into the Great Depression. Well, if you're Hillary, who is incompetent, and death follows her, no matter if it's the Rose Law Firm in Arkansas to Benghazi as Secretary of State, you name it. If she's got chaos in her wake, do you really want to be president in the collapse? Go down in history? There wouldn't be a woman elected president for 1,000 years if things went wrong under her.
Well, that's the game she's trying to play anyway, too, is that
she's a narcissist.
I'd be the first woman president.
Power as a psychopath.
Well, she's already claiming that if Obama can't nominate a judge before he leaves, that it's because it's racism if he's not able to nominate a judge.
Because she refuses to look at history. Back when Sam Alito was being nominated under George Bush, guess who was one of the 24 Democrats who filibustered? Obama. And then, of course, in 2007, which was a year before George Bush was getting it out of office, John Roberts was up, and Chuck Schumer publicly, and his words can easily be found, said that we should not allow him to put a Supreme Court justice.
Another fucking douchebag. I can't stand him.
But what I'm saying is, see, this is the problem with most Americans is the precedent is out there. But because we have such short-term
they're
memories,
all hypocritical.
These politicians lie to your face. Oh, I better believe it because you know what? They're rich and they're politicians and they would never lie.
Yeah, I don't get this even asking about, they'll ask, well, who's the most, who would you trust the most? Why would you trust some politician that you don't even fucking know? I don't get any of that. But
hey, she's in Congress. Congress has an 11% rate. And see, this is, in the whole scheme of things, is something you and I talked about on the phone off the thing earlier today. I've given up trying to blame politicians. Politicians are who they are. Okay, they're power seekers. They're either egoists or they're narcissists. One of the two. It's either for them or it's either for to build themselves up, or it's because they hate themselves so much they've got to personify their vision on everybody else. So
there are occasional people that that start at like a low level and actually do want to help people and end up getting corrupted, or they do end up hanging around, but they don't get anywhere because they don't, follow everybody else. So they're I call them
Lot. I call them Lots. Like, back in the Bible, Abraham and Lot. Lot and his family, God told him to get out of Sodom and Gomorrah, but he was so enraptured because Sodom was so rich and he was, doing so well and so well respected, even though it was hedonism and sodomy and just absolute, evil in that town. Because he had the ability to make money and that enamored him more than the evil that was around him. He didn't want to leave, and it took being dragged out to leave. And even then, his wife looked back, wanting, I want to go back, and she turned into a pillar of salt. But that's another story. But the point is that you can be as moralistic, you can be as righteous, you can be a good person, but when you enter into a den of evil, very few people can stay who they are.
But I'm saying, you could just be one of those lone people in the House of Representatives that really can't do anything anyway. That's sitting there, even if you are a good person and you vote how you want to vote. But what does your one vote fucking do anyway? But you were about to mention something about you don't blame the politicians anymore.
Yeah, because the politicians have all lied for decades. At least the decades I've been around, decades you've been around. It doesn't matter. You get out the Democrats, the Republicans come in, they're liars.
Right. It's all this. Well, it's all the same thing that oh, well, we need to just get the right people in there. And you've been hearing that forever, every year. We need just to get the right people in there and follow the Constitution.
But
of course,
the point is the problem lies at the feet of the people, not the politicians. Everybody rants and raves about the politicians. And if they take a survey, 11% have trust in Congress. Well, why is it 90% of incumbents keep getting voted in? It's because people love to rant, but when it comes to taking action, they refuse to do anything.
Right. No, that's
been
true.
humanity
but
all around.
The action has to be, well, I mean, we differ on what the action has to be, but to me, it has to be something like noncompliance, where we say, fuck this, because it's gone too far. And I don't want to get into a long conversation on this because I know you got a lot to talk about, but it's gone too far where, and it was, before I was born, it was fucked up. I mean, it's to the point now where, what are you going to do?
Well,
besides, go ahead.
You remember the movie Captain America?
Yeah,
the first one.
Well, I remember the first and the second one, but which one are you talking about?
When the scientist from Germany, I'll forget who was played by, he was talking to Steve Rogers, and he said something very important, and this is what people don't realize. He said, yes, I grew up in Germany. But most people forget the first country that the Nazis conquered was Germany. And that's the same thing here in the U.S. is our government and the powers that be and this system has conquered the American people. And when the Nazis were first starting up in the brown shirts and the pageants and that, the people could have stood up and rebelled against them, but they didn't. The people, the Bolsheviks who followed Lenin and threw out the Tsar before before Stalin came in, they could have rebelled and stood up against this. They didn't.
Well, a lot of people could have done a lot of things, and like I said, by the time I was born, or at least old enough to even be able to comprehend what the fuck was going on, it was pretty much too late. But the only way that I see people being able to do anything, like I said, is non-compliance and self-defense, and that's it. Voting doesn't do shit, obviously. It's just it's a big circle of people saying, well, if we just vote the right people in next year and get the right candidates and get I don't know really what.
It's because in America, most Americans are not pushed to the point.
Well, yeah, we know that they're not out in the street starving to death. I mean, we've talked about stuff like this before.
India, where which was under British occupation at the time of Gandhi, and they had nothing, so they had nothing to lose.
Well, they keep people happy enough, just happy enough to not do anything.
Bingo.
And we've talked about that before, and I've talked about it before a lot, where they keep people happy enough where, I'm losing some of my freedoms, but do I want to risk, I got a house, I got kids, my life's not that bad. I can watch some football and TV and blah, blah, blah. So, that's what that's where, and this is where the U.S. Did a much better job than Germany, where they just said, hey, we're taking over. Now, they didn't do it right away neither. They did it, but they did it too fast. The U.S. tries to keep that illusion of freedom. And for a certain amount of people, for a lot of people, let me tell you a story real quick before we get into the stuff that you got to talk about. So, and I don't know if I might have told you this off air. I don't remember. I don't think I did, though, but this is how angry people are and how much they love the government. And that's another benefit, that the government even has the people they're oppressing fighting for them. So I went to a fundraiser. A friend is running for Congress. She's running for the House of Representatives. Now, I mean, I know her pretty well. I've had conversations with her that lasted hours long, talking about, you know, political stuff and you know, all the bullshit and whatever. And I don't think it's going to make a difference. That's what she wants to do. That's fine. I told her I can't vote for her because I'm not going to vote, even though she's actually running in my district. But my fiance is going to vote for her, so that's fine. But so I put out my cards. I have cards for the show on the table, and this guy picks it up, you know, looks at it. He didn't seem that bad. He's like, what are you, like a libertarian or something? And, of course, these are Republicans because she's a Republican. And I told him I don't believe in government. So that doesn't really go over too well with people that are actually into government, you know, Republicans or Democrats. So this is what he said. Instead of saying, you know, well, what if somebody broke in? Or he's like, well, what if, and I think he said the caliber of the gun too. He's like, well, what if I shot you in the head right now with a 45? What would happen? Because there'd be no police around to do anything. And I'm like, first of all, I'd be dead either way. But the fact that even my fiance was like, what the fuck? And the fact that he got so angry because I said I don't believe in government, instead of asking me, well, what do you mean? Or asking me to explain in any way or anything like that. He actually had to go to that point, like, what if I shot you in the head right now with a 45? I mean, he was even thinking of the caliber. So you have these people, and I've gotten it from a lot of people, that they get very fucking angry if you say anything about the government. Look at what I played on Trump. Oh, he insulted this person and this person. And I'm not talking about the, you know, stupid insults. I'm talking about like McCain's record or things like that. So you have all of these people as well at the same time that government can't do any wrong. And they get very angry if you try to even speak out.
Yeah, because, you know, it's like the 1950s. People have a vision of what America is, the American dream. You know, we won the war.
And it's all a bunch of bullshit.
Well, you know, almost everything that people do is creating a paradigm in their lives and what their belief system is, whether it's a religious belief, whether it's a ideological belief. You know, why do you think all these millennials are following Bernie Sanders? If you had...
Because they're idiots and they want to sit home and do nothing. Free stuff. They get to sit around and do nothing. I know.
You know why?
They
Because
don't realize the reality
what is their
of
life?
it.
The reality of their life is that there are no jobs and that they owe $100,000 on student loans.
But they're too stupid to realize the reality of what it actually means. But before we get to, and I know I keep saying that, what was because you had said that, you know, it's Americans' fault at this point. And so very briefly, what would, and I know I talked about this before with you, but it's been a while, but very briefly, what would be your solution to turning things around? Or is there no solution? Is it just like, you know, get the fuck out, do what you can to...
Well, if people want a solution, what they're going to do is they're going to do a constitutional convention by the states, not by Congress, but by the states. There's two ways that you can pull this. And then what you're going to do is you're going to remove the 15th or 16th Amendment, which is the direct election of senators, and put that back into the House of Representatives, into the legislatures, the state legislatures. The second thing that you're going to do is you're going to have the states pass term limits for Congress, and then also pass an age limit for the Supreme Court. Okay, if you cut down the possibility of them running for office, then you remove a lot of the potential corruption that's going to be in there.
So to summarize, it's more of a constitutional convention, because there are other people that think the same way.
Well, yeah, but the point is that the states won't do it unless the people stand behind the states in mass. You know, how many people go to PTA meetings anymore? And then they wonder why their education system is absolutely corrupt. How many people go to their city council meetings and hold their feet to the fire?
Well, I have actually gone to Clark County Commission meetings about them hiring more police, but I've given up in the system. So
how many people were there with you? That's what I'm saying.
Actually, for that, a lot, because all the activists went. But I mean, it was just the activists that went. It wasn't like your average person.
Right. But the point is,
But yeah, not a lot of people in general go. I know what you're saying, but I think it's too far beyond
Remember what Benjamin Franklin said when the woman asked, coming out of the Second Continental Congress, and said, "What kind of government did you give us? Did you give us a monarchy, or did you give us a dictatorship?" And he said, "We gave you a republic." Only
I know, but
if you can keep it.
I don't believe in the current government. I don't believe in the original government. So that's why I'm always gonna differ on my opinion on what should be done.
But the thing about it is you don't believe in a government, but you're doing it as an individual, and you're doing your activism as an individual. The same thing with the government. You can have, no government's perfect. You know why? Because man is not perfect. Because governments are run by men and women, but I'm just using the singular here.
That's the problem. But nobody should have power over somebody else, in my opinion. Unless it's agreed upon power, unless it's based on consent, like when you get a job and you agree to
then everybody would live as tribal nomads like they did 5,000 years ago.
That's a matter of opinion, as I think you brought that up earlier today.
It goes back to the saying, show me where it has worked at any place.
It has never been tried.
Yes, it is. The utopian societies in America, like New Harmony, Indiana, or a few others where a corporate owner invited people over to run themselves in these utopian societies in the 19th century.
I'd have to be more familiar with that, but I don't know how the federal government would let them get away with it. But
no, they did. Yeah, because the federal government, this was prior to the Civil War, and the federal government really didn't keep its nose in anything.
Well, if you're talking about prior to the Civil War, again, with the technology we have now, things are a lot different, where there's things that you can do now that you couldn't do. So it's open. It's a matter of opinion, but I think because of the technology, there are ways to do a lot of things now that you couldn't possibly do back then. But speaking of earlier, we were talking about the Great Depression. Are we in for a even greater depression, or at least a similar sized depression?
No, we're not going to have a great depression per se.
We're just going to be depressed.
we are going to have if everything goes according to the way it's going, is going to be eventually a lessening of our standard of living. We'll move down to a second or third level, third world country,
right?
Where we have a dictatorship because they will force it on it when the economic collapse occurs. But there's a lot of, to tell the truth, what comes out of this, they're trying interesting things, and that's probably going to be the big theme of tonight. Is the last desperate act of the scoundrel, the end of money. Now, I don't know if we talked about this last week, but starting with a Harvard academic in about August of last year, and now it's been accelerating into the new year, central bankers some government agencies and a bunch of academics are calling for the end of cash because.
Yeah, you had mentioned something about that.
Yeah, we need to expand upon it because Japan, Switzerland, and Sweden already have negative interest rates. Negative interest rates are a tax on your money. Okay? It's meant to force people to spend. It's
right.
a tax
and
on savers. It's a tax on accounts.
And it's money for the bank where they're getting paid to borrow money, right? They're getting paid interest.
Well, what the banks do is they actually are paid to borrow money, but
That's what I
for
mean.
those who have money and don't do anything with it, then they're getting taxed, and that money goes directly to the Fed, and then that goes directly to the bank. But it's even more. If all of a sudden you had a bank account and the Federal Reserve says we're going to lower interest rates and negative interest rates, meaning where in the past you may have gotten like 1% or 0.5% of interest on your savings account, in light of the fact that banks use your savings to lend, to create mortgages, to do car loans, to do this and that. So they collect their interest and they pay you a modicum sum. Back in the day, we used to get between 0.5% and 2% interest for our money. Negative interest rates means that if you have money in there, you're a liability to the banking system, and that they will take a tax, a fee. They'll call it a fee, but it's really a tax, and they'll start taking 0.5% or 1% each month out of your money. So if people knew that they were going to start taxing your bank accounts, what are people going to do?
Well, they're going to take all their money out the bank, like we talked about before.
Now that's what normal people would do, and but that's the biggest fear, is because they desperately need you to spend your money. And if you're taking it out of the banks, that means that, one, they don't have control over it, and two, you are it doesn't help the economy, because if they're starting to tax bank accounts and the economy is going into collapse, people don't spend. They hoard their money.
Right.
In the Bank of Sealy. So that makes the economy even worse.
What happened to, you had mentioned, and I think another country's doing this, but you had mentioned the possibility of the U.S. doing this, sending out actual, somebody was sending out $2,500 checks. Some country, I'm thinking it's Denmark or one of those countries.
Has approved a referendum. It's going to be voted for in June. And the people can decide if they will, what this will do is it'll be a major tax on people who are earning money, but everybody, no matter what, from a homeless person to the richest, each one will get 2,500 euros every month.
Well, they have to find the address of the homeless person, but
yeah, but they don't have a lot of homeless
trash
people
bag.
in Switzerland.
This box, 34 box lane. But sorry, where was that again? Switzerland. Sorry to interrupt. You said Switzerland, and was there another place?
One of the Norse countries. I think it's Denmark.
Denmark. That's what I had said.
Yeah,
Denmark
is doing 800 euros. Yeah, they're giving people 800 euros. But it's kind of funny is the Bernie Sanders followers always love to say, look at Switzerland and Sweden and Norway. They're all socialist.
Yeah, how great they are.
Utopian paradises. There was a lady who was on the TV. She is a citizen of Denmark, and she said, "I make $60,000 a year. 80% of it is taken away from me in taxes.
60 US.
20%. Well, 60,000 euros.
Oh,
but 80% is taken away in taxes and fees. She only gets to keep what's 80% of 60,000? 48,000. She gets to keep 12,000 euros a year to spend as she sees fit.
Well, and I shouldn't be in that high of a tax bracket. I mean, I'm not a fucking, millionaire or even 100,000aire, and I think I got at least the 30% of my money was taken, including of course, not just the federal income tax, but, the Social Security and FICA and all that bullshit. I think it was at least 30%. I'd have to do the math there.
Yeah, but it'll be, overall, the average per year for all Americans who actually earn income, they are paying 48% of their money in taxes, fees.
Yeah, but I don't have state income tax. Well, I didn't count my gasoline tax. I'm talking about my payroll.
Yeah, but do you have property tax?
No, but I'm sure it's everybody has property tax technically because it's built into your rent.
Right.
I mean,
but my point is that you're looking at it from a Nevada state of view. Imagine if you lived in New York.
Right. Well, I'm looking at, but
imagine if you live in California. See, it averages out. Some people in some states are going to pay much, much, much more.
Yeah, but I think even based off of that, I'm paying too much. And like I said, I don't pay any state because Nevada doesn't have state income tax. And of course, again, I'm not. We have a high sales tax though.
Who's your cell phone provider?
I don't know. I want to say
okay,
that.
You don't have to tell me, but
I'll tell you. I don't know that I want to tell everybody out there.
About 3% of it is funky fees and
taxes.
Yeah. Paying for other people who don't have phones. That's where Obama's
right. Well, I mean, if I took the, because you're talking about how much do I pay in tax as a whole, and I mean that's huge. I'm just talking about payroll tax because it's the only thing I can track.
Right.
If I sat there and tracked, like I said, in Nevada, we just got another increase in Clark County because of the stupid fucking police, so they could hire more police. So we're over 8-something% in sales tax already in Nevada. Now, people that live here get the break because there's no state income tax. And then what they do is, they try to make it from all the tourists that come here. Of course, if you look at it, it'd be kind of stupid not to have a sales tax with all the tourists coming in.
Well, if you don't have a state income tax, you got to have tax anyway. And I have no problem with a sales tax. You know why? Because the Constitution says that you can do a tariff, and a sales tax is a form of tariff. It's a domestic tariff versus an international tariff.
Just because the Constitution says it's okay doesn't mean that I'm okay with it. It says a lot of things. I'm not okay with any tax.
Even if the money didn't go to police, it goes to keeping the sewer systems going. It goes for keeping.
Well, not exactly, because if you own a house, you have a sewer bill.
Right, and that's the tax. That's a tax on it.
Well, if you're talking about if that's what you're talking about, but it's just like gas tax. But it doesn't though, because it does, and then I'm sure for whatever reason they overspend shit, just like the roads. They keep saying they need more money for the fucking roads, right? But gas tax is supposed to cover the fucking roads.
Well, you're right,
it doesn't.
But see, that's not a problem of taxation. That's a problem of what the corrupt people in office do with the money. It's because they take this money is supposed to go to the general or to the transportation fund. What they do is they take it and put it in the general fund, and when they don't have enough money, then they say, "Well, we're just not going to fill the potholes in for here." But they have enough money. The problem is not enough money. The problem is where they allocate the money.
Well, it is because they never have enough money, because no matter what happens, they're always going to need more money, because there's always something they're going to look for, because that's their job. Their job is to find more things. Exactly. So they're always going to look for more things. So taxes are always going to go up, not because they're needed to go up, but because they want to find more things to get involved in. It's like if you have a job where your job is you're in charge of expanding the business, and you want to go out, and I could take the hotel industry just because I know about it, and you want to go and buy more resorts. So you want to expand, and you're going to need more money to do that. So the government is run like a business where we need money for this now. We need money for this. It's never enough. They will never get to a point where they say, we have enough money now.
Yeah, but the point behind that is it's Lord Acton's axiom: power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. When you start getting into the realm of power, it's like in alcoholism or drug addiction. You can't stop. You need more. You need a bigger fix. Ruling. It's like any ruler in history. If Charlemagne was given one half of what is now France, that wasn't good enough for him, and he spent the next 50 years on horseback fighting 50 to 60 battles, taking more and more territory. It is considered in history, you have to expand your territory to be considered a great ruler.
Right. It's like it's human nature where, for the most part, depending on what it is, people want to expand in whatever they're doing. Yep. But it's most similar to a business. Government is most similar to a business where taxes is their revenue, and everybody wants to expand their budget. So it works a little differently because they're not really in the business of making money in that way, in the same way that you make money because you produce a product or you provide a service. They're not making money the same way. They're making money by you're working or you're running a business, and they're just taking part of your fucking money and doing it that way. So it works in a different way, but the main goal is the same. They want more money so they can spend more money.
Yep. And see, now I'm gonna transition that back into the topic here: ending money, negative interest rates. Okay, the logical thing that's going to happen is if you do negative interest rates, you're going to have automatically people taking their money out of the system. Well, if you take the money out of the system, they're not going to spend it. It's going to make your economy even worse. And it's a snake eating its tail.
Well, at some point they're going to try to stop them, obviously.
Well, that's the point. When you go to negative interest rates, because negative interest rates, the reason they're doing this, okay, is because they've built up this debt bubble, $227 trillion worldwide of sovereign debt, 557 when you add in derivatives. They've created this debt bubble so big, they can't pay it off. But the debt doesn't go away. What they have to do is they have to roll it over when it matures. Whether it's a 5-year or 10-year treasury bond, every 5 or 10 years, they've got to roll that over. Well, the higher the interest rate, that means that the higher that the government has to pay back when it rolls it over in the future. Negative interest rates means that they can borrow money cheaper to roll over the debt.
So, sorry to interrupt. In your opinion, you take, say, the U.S., right, and they owe what, $20 trillion now?
Yep.
So that $20 trillion, and I remember looking over debt over just the history of the country, and I don't think it's ever went down. It seems like it's always went up. But is it just forever, basically, that all they're going to do is pay the interest on the debt, never paying the debt down, and then, 20 years from now, the debt will be fucking 40 trillion or 60 trillion.
Well, they're at the point of no return. See, in the past, we've had not only balanced budgets, but we've gone. We used to be a debtor nation.
Yeah, but even a balanced budget is not going to
hold on a second.
Put down your debt. It's just not going to add to it.
In the 1960s, we were a debtor nation. Okay, that means we were a lender of money. We weren't a borrower of money, and we didn't have national debt. We had a national debt after the Great Depression, and especially after World War II. But within 10 years, our economy boomed up so great that we paid off that. And before the start of the Vietnam War, we didn't have any national debt, and we had a balanced budget. As a matter of fact, we were lending money out to everybody. But once Vietnam War happened, this is when things changed, and it's the reason why we were taken off the silver standard in 1964. Okay, that was the first kicker. They needed to expand the money supply to be able to afford the war in Vietnam. And because we expanded the money supply, we made the dollar, we devalued the dollar against all these other world currencies. And France, which was just just suddenly coming out of rebuilding from World War II, they were sitting there going, we don't want this dollar reserve currency to be devalued. Hey, we want gold for our dollars, because the gold window was still open. And that's when the run on gold led to the 1971 closing of the gold window.
Right.
It's because we were doing well, being a lender, having the reserve currency, having countries borrow from us, but we got greedy because we wanted to get into a war that we should never have been in. And then LBJ said, we're going to do this war on poverty, and start putting extra billions and trillions of dollars over the last 40 years, and it just skyrocketed. And then, of course, politicians promise everything to get votes. So we create this thing called Medicare. We create this thing called, we expanded Social Security to include the disabled, and just on and on and on and on. And they passed a bill under Clinton to move the money that was in the Social Security lockbox and put in U.S. Treasuries. You're putting debt. You're replacing that money with debt. They put it in the general fund. You want to know why Bill Clinton can say that he has a balanced budget? It's because he stole from the Social Security Department to fill the budget.
But don't forget about, right, because they don't have to pay it out till years later, a lot of it. Well, not really. They're using the money now. Bingo. Like the money they're taking now are for the people that are retired now, not the money that the people that retired paid in, fucking 30 years ago.
Enough money monthly from the W-2 forms and that from
because that's really what it should be. What it should be is their money should have been invested, and they should really be getting paid back their own money. It shouldn't exist at all. You should get the money and you invest it yourself, and whatever. But
see, that's also go ahead.
Well, but then the other thing that I don't know if you were going to get to this or not. Of course, the biggest thing, and some of it was kept off the books, and some of it just fucking disappeared. If you remember the Department of Defense, money just disappearing. Yeah. It fucking is the military budget. And you have every single person in the Republican Party talking about building up the military. I'm like, what the fuck are you talking about building up the military?
But except for Jimmy Carter, who pretty much gutted the military, even the Democrats. Clinton
didn't last long.
Bill Clinton and Obama. Obama's actually taking us to more conflicts than whatever. So it's both sides.
I'm not talking about the parties. I'm just saying that the debates right now, they're all talking about it in the Republican. I'm not saying that the Democrats aren't going to do it as well, but what I'm saying is if you watch any of the debates, the Republican debates, they're all talking about building up the military.
Right.
And I'm like, building up the military when you're already spending the ridiculous amount of money that they're spending, and they're talking about spending more and building up the military more. So that's why you have these parties that don't make sense. And it's for a reason. It's like they created these two parties, and both of them want to control you, just in different ways. There's no party that makes sense. Like, to me, a party that all stood for freedom would make sense. But they don't, because you have, like, the Republicans, oh, yeah, we want the government out of our lives, and we want the government to not spend a lot of money. Well, unless it's the military, or it's drugs, or it's this. And the same with the Democrats.
Right,
so,
but it still goes back to the people. Because if the people are ignorant to believe what the words of politicians say, then you know what? They got nothing coming. This is why incumbents keep getting voted in.
Well, they want it. Part of it is that a lot of these fucks are so scared about ISIS, which is ridiculous, You even had, I watched this documentary, you even had this former analyst who said, you know, the chances are like zero. He's like, I don't worry about it. You know, I mean, the chances that you're going to get killed in a terrorist attack, you have a better chance of probably being struck by lightning 2 days in a row. I mean, it's
but
like
if people could critically think, the fact of the matter is, we created ISIS. Even if the CIA and the MI5 and the Mossad were not involved in the Syrian Free Army, okay, take that aside.
Well, I didn't create ISIS, but the U.S. government did.
When we went into, okay, you know, semantics. When we went into Afghanistan, we went into Iraq, and we caused chaos in the region, okay, taking out leaders that were strong enough to hold the Sunni Shiite, conflicts at bay. When we created chaos in the region, we created the terrorists who's sitting there going, "What the, and they lost their homes, they lost their families. So what are they going to do? They got nothing to lose." They decided instead of like India and Gandhi, nonviolence, they said the opposite. Jihad.
It's not just about that, because I saw another documentary where, do you know that a lot of these guys in ISIS, and I think the CIA runs ISIS, a lot of these guys in ISIS, they don't care about Islam. They're not doing it for jihad. They're doing it because they're making more money than they were making it. And they even said that. They said, why did you join ISIS? He said, well, I'm not making enough money with this other job.
Well, exactly. You know, you take a look at Saudi Arabia.
Like, they don't care about the
Saudi
whole,
Arabia has an oligarchy. Okay, they have 5% that are getting 95% of all the money. 95% of Saudis are dirt poor. Well, if you've got no future, and somebody offers you something, of course. This is the same thing that's happening in the Ferguson riots and the Baltimore riots and whatever. Most of the rioters are paid. Almost every major protest that takes place in America today are professional rioters, protesters.
The ones, I think, not the ones that were truly out there just protesting the police, but the ones that were out there burning. Exactly. They were Democratic operatives. That's what they were. Yeah, exactly. And then they want to blame it, because the real people, because I knew people that went down there, they were saying, no, this isn't even a black or white thing. It's the police fucking harassing us. And that's exactly what they do. It's all controlled, because anything that gets that much media attention is for a reason. Because you have all this stuff going on that doesn't get any attention because they don't want it to.
Okay,
it's all rigged.
But bringing that thing all way back, if you are an insider and you know that the system is failing, the banks are insolvent, the economy is collapsing, you're not going to tell the American people, because one of the American people would come at you with pitchforks and torches, or they panic. One of the two. And panic, by panic, is they would buy everything off the shelves, they would take all their money out of the bank, and then they would start the collapse themselves. So right now the insiders know it's collapsing, so they're trying to do a controlled collapse. Negative interest rates is a way of controlled collapse. It's a way to steal the wealth, but they're doing it in slowly, trickling down. Now, two things that have happened this week. On Monday, the Eurozone voted to remove the 500 euro bill. And Larry Summers, who was
I know who he is, but for the audience,
former treasury
he was the one who was involved in getting rid of Glass-Steagall with Clinton.
Exactly. Larry Summers did an op-ed in the New York Times on Tuesday calling for the end of the $100 bill. Now, why do you get rid of large denomination bills? They're using the old fallacy of, we'll stop drugs and it'll stop cartels and it'll stop terrorists from using money. But you know what? We've had the war on drugs for 40 years. We've had the war on terror for more than 10. If this was really a big deal, they would have implemented this long time ago. No, they're doing it at the exact same time, negative interest rates, because to be able to do negative interest rates, you have to do capital controls. And capital controls mean controlling consumption and the use of money by people. So if people want to take their money out of the bank and there's no longer $100 bills and all there are 20s, 10s, and 5s, that'd be like you'd have to take some wheelbarrows and that down their suitcases just to get your money out of the bank.
Well, that's one of the positive things about Las Vegas is that Las Vegas is all cash business. Now, they could at some point they could be doing it right now. They could be building some kind of system to get it out of the cash business, but everything's cash. You cannot walk up to a fucking table with a card. I mean, you walk up with the card, your casino card where you get points, but everything's cash. So if there's going to be a place that's going to go cashless, the last place to go cashless is going to be the state of Nevada.
Now, here's something interesting. In every country, from Argentina to Venezuela to Zimbabwe to the Weimar Republic in Germany, when they were going through hyperinflation or extreme inflation, where their money was devaluing to the point that they couldn't afford to buy a loaf of bread, their stock markets were the highest on the continent. Because what devaluing currency does is people say, you know what, since my money won't buy me any tangible goods, I might as well just put it in the stock markets and maybe it'll rise, in value with the stocks.
Like buying a lottery ticket and hoping that you win?
That's another reason why they use these capital controls. Now, the capital control they want to do is to end money and make everything electronic.
Now, that okay? Never mind. I know that's national, not national, but all over the world. But
right. But the point of this is, there's in Africa,
they want to do that on so many levels. I mean, because
but they don't have time to try to implement it in third world countries.
Right.
The collapse is occurring now, so they want to implement this in first world economies.
But what I'm saying is they want to do it for so many reasons, because there's also the tracking everything you do part of it.
Tracking aside,
with,
yes. Tracking aside, but what they will do if you go entirely electronic and you end cash, that means that the black market would either go to Bitcoin, it would go to some type of script that people create themselves,
gold, silver.
But yeah, possibly. And I'm going to get to gold here in a second. But the point about the thing is it forces everybody to have a bank account. Even if you're not in the banking system, you have to have a bank account, because any money that is recognized will be completely digital and it'll be controlled by the banks. And once they have that, and they create negative interest rates, they can force you to spend when they want you to spend, or they'll just keep taxing it until it's all gone. They can force you to save if they want to stop inflation. So that means that they'll limit your use of money to maybe like $100 a week. They can force you to, they'll take your taxes right out of your bank account.
Right. They'll take everything out of your bank account.
They'll force Obamacare. You can't, if they could jack Obamacare premiums up to like $10,000 a month and start taking out of your account, and you can't.
You have no control over anything.
And so, with that being said, what is the only true rebellion against the system where they have no counterparty risk and there is no way that they can do anything to your money? Gold, physical gold and silver.
Right.
That's the only way. You could buy real estate, but
you could
tax it.
You could barter for certain things if people want to start more black market economies on the internet.
Well, true, but let's talk about food. Let's talk about you live in a city in food. One, the zoning rights, you can't grow anything. And two, you're relegated to the shop, the grocery store, which would require
which you're going to have
money.
to use. Exactly.
So
on that note, let's take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll talk more about the effects of a cashless society. And I also want to talk about how long this would take, because even with one of the things that comes to mind is like the Real ID. Now, I know that's something totally different, but the Real ID is something that should have been a lot easier and quicker for them to do. And it took them like 10 years. In some states, they're still right on the edge of getting it done. And I think New Hampshire might be one of those states. But I remember reading about that for years, going back to early 2000s, and Ron Paul speaking out about it. So whether this is something that they can implement pretty quick or they already have planned to do, that might be another story. But let's talk about that when we come back. We're here with Ken Schortgen of the Daily Economist, thedailyeconomist.com. And if you'd like to call in, join the conversation, 702-470-7664. That's 702-470-7664. Or you could Skype in to the show as well. Nonpartisan Liberty for All. Just send us a contact request. And you can get any of that information at nonpartisanlibertyforall.com, where we also have a whole bunch of, well, maybe not a whole bunch, but we have articles, editorials, things like that for you to read also, as well as pictures and other things. So, and we're trying to work on the site and improve it as well. But there's still a lot on there for people to look at. So hopefully some of you are reading some of the articles there. But of course, on Ken's site, you have a professional writer at thedailyeconomist.com, where you can read plenty of articles, plenty of important articles there as well. So we'll be right back after this. nonpartisanlibertyforall.com.
Hey, an alien! Yes, I've travelled across space to check on the progress of your species. Cool. Shall I take you to our leader? Your what? Our leader, the guy in charge. The guy in charge of what? Well, in charge of everything. You have one guy in charge of everything? No, he's in charge of government. What is government? Well, government makes the rules for us. It tells us what we can do and what we can't do. So is government really smart? They come up with wise rules for you to follow? Well, mostly. But some of its rules are really stupid. Do you disregard those rules? No, we have to follow the rules, even if they are stupid or we disagree with them. Government punishes anyone who disobeys the rules. So you are slaves to government? No, it's not like that at all. Government works for us, the people. It serves us. We're the boss. It tells you what to do, and it punishes you with violence if you disobey it, and yet you're its boss? Yeah. But there are some things government does that you don't like. Well, yeah, not everything government does is popular, like spending on wars, for example. What is a war? It's when government basically spends the people's money on weapons and soldiers and then sends them over to the other side of the world to kill a bunch of people over there and destroy their country. I don't like it that government does this. Well, I can see why you might not like that. Have you humans reached the stage where you generally consider stealing, enslaving, and killing each other to be bad things? Oh yeah, we know that. Don't steal, don't attack, don't assault. But you give money to government and they use it to kill people. Well, yeah. But government does good things with tax money as well. Why don't you stop paying for the things you don't like and only pay for the good things it does?
No, we can't do that. You can't just decide to stop paying taxes because the rules say that everyone has to pay taxes.
But the rules come from government though, don't they?
Yeah.
So government made a rule which says that everyone has to pay them money. So everyone pays taxes because if they didn't, government would punish them using violence?
Well, yes, but most people don't mind paying taxes. Most people feel obligated to pay taxes and obey government laws because it's for the good of society. Society needs government, and that means we all have to pay taxes.
So just to make sure I've got this straight, government makes the rules and you feel obligated to follow the rules, even the ones you don't like, and it tells you what to do and threatens to punish you if you don't do what it says, and it uses some of the money that it's taken from you using threats of violence to pay for things you don't like and actually think are immoral, like mass murder.
Yeah, but we can ask it to please tell us to do smart things, and please don't take our money and use it to kill people. We're allowed to ask them to tell us to do what we want them to tell us to do.
Are you guys just scared of this thing? Is government some huge monster that can just squish you at any moment if you disobey?
No, government isn't a monster.
Well, what is it then? Could you draw me a picture of it?
Government isn't really the sort of thing you can draw a picture of.
Maybe you could take me to it. Where is government?
You mean the building?
Government is a building.
No, but the politicians who make up the government have buildings they work from.
So government is a group of these politicians?
Yeah.
Okay, so what species are these politicians?
Well, they're human.
Like you?
Yeah.
So politicians are humans and they're government. You're a human, but you're not government.
No.
So it's the politicians, they're the ones that boss the rest of you around and make you do things you don't want to do and take your money using threats of violence. But even though you're all humans, you're not allowed to boss them around and take their money?
No, they'd put us in a cage if we did that. But look, it's not like the politicians can just do whatever they want. Like, a politician can't just come up to me on the street and make me give him money. They can't do that. Politicians can only do things like that in their job, when they're working for government.
Oh, so politicians aren't government, they just work for government?
Yeah.
Okay, so government isn't a monster, and it isn't a building, and it's not politicians, it's something else. And it employs politicians, who are just regular humans, who get to order everyone else around and take their money. How does a regular human become a politician?
Well, that's the great thing about our government. It's a democracy, and that means that the people actually have the power, because we get to decide who among us get to be the politicians. We get to vote. And if a politician starts doing things we don't like, we can just replace him with someone else at the next election.
So the people that get chosen to be politicians only get to boss people around and take their money for a short time, and then they go back to being regular humans?
Exactly.
That sounds like a powerful position to be in. But if you get to choose who does that, I assume that politicians are always the wisest, most honest, caring and respected people among you.
Well, no, not really. I wouldn't say politicians are known for being honest, or wise, or caring. And they're certainly not the most respected people among us. Come to think of it, most politicians are lying, power-hungry crooks.
The ones you chose?
Yeah, they're always doing things we don't like. They use taxpayers' money to enrich themselves and their friends, and they never keep their promises to voters. They've been caught stealing and lying and taking bribes, and they mostly do what the big corporations want. Yeah, they're always doing stuff like that. They're completely corrupt. They're a bunch of lying crooks.
But you said that most humans know that stealing and beating each other up and killing are wrong. And you said that you have the power because you can change who's in charge. So why don't you just replace the lying, thieving, murderous, crooked politicians with some regular people?
Well, we don't try to elect lying crooks. It just always turns out that way. But we have to have a government because some humans are nasty and might kill or enslave or steal. Civilization just couldn't survive without government.
Let me get this straight. Because you're worried about the small number of nasty people that are willing to kill, enslave and steal, you think it's necessary for your survival to have a system where some humans among you, for a short while, get to call themselves the government, and they get to order everyone else around like slaves and, if they want, commit mass murder overseas, using money they stole using threats of violence. Politicians get to kill, enslave and steal because if they didn't, someone else might. And you try to elect good, honest people to be politicians, but what happens every time is that the people you elect turn out to be corrupt, evil, lying crooks. That's your system.
Yeah, that's pretty much government.
Nonpartisan Liberty for All. Call in at 702-470-7664 or Skype in. Username Nonpartisan Liberty for All.
And we are back here with Ken Schortgen of the Daily Economist, thedailyeconomist.com. We were talking all about the going to a cardless society, but going to a cashless society. So we kind of left it on how long do you think that would take? I know they had a town in England. I remember reading about this town in England where it was like a test site, or not even a test. What would they call it? What do they call it when it's not a test? They're actually implementing it in that town, but they're still like testing it. They might take it back later. Ken, are you there? I seem to have...
Nope, sorry.
Oh, okay, there we go.
Yeah, I was on mute there during the break.
So did you hear my question or? Yeah.
I think it's more, it's like more like a prototype than it is a, test per se, but.
Cause they're doing the same thing with cars in a town in Oregon. They're doing, it's not called, they've already done the test. Now they're in an actual, I forget the name of it. It's pissing me off.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about in Oregon.
You know
what they're trying to do is
with the cars,
give a mile tax versus a gasoline tax.
And then they'll also have a GPS in your car and know where you are all the time.
No, but the point is something like this is going to happen. You're going to have bank holiday. It's going to be out in the blue, out of nowhere. Okay? Because if, like I said, if the government starts, publicly saying they're going to do this, then you'll have a bank run to end all bank runs in a New York minute.
Yeah, but
people need to be prepared, and they need to be getting their money out of the banks.
But will it be something where you're talking about one day they've gone to a card like that, or that they'll go, it will slowly go into the card scenario where now everything, there's no cash anymore.
There's a big difference between a cashless society and the end of money. Okay, because 80% of all transactions right now in the United States are done electronically.
Right.
Direct deposits electronic.
Most stuff is
use our debit cards, our credit cards,
and even
gift
paying
cards.
your bills. Like I pay most of the major corporations. They have electronic transfers to the banks when you pay your bills and stuff.
Online
like
bill
that.
pay.
Yeah.
See, that's a benign form of a cashless society, and that's fine because you are still in control of your money. The reason
Right.
is because at the foundation of this,
and I use
is the
that,
is
and
the
I like
belief
it, to be
that
honest.
at any time you can go to your ATM or your teller and take out cash.
Right. Or you can even cancel your payment. See, what I do is I don't like you know how you can set it up where it will automatically take the money out? I hate that. I won't do that unless I'm getting something where it requires me to. I like to schedule my payments because then I have control. Okay, I'm getting paid this week on this day, and I can schedule my payments that way as opposed to, oh, my account just got fucking debited, because that way, and this actually benefits the banks, that way you got to keep more money in the bank just in case you're fucking, around when they debit it, but you don't know. It could be somewhere within this whole week or something, as opposed to with how I have it set up, it actually will do it on that exact day. So I've been doing that for years, and I like how it does it, but I like to have control. So I don't even like to set up the automatic bill pay because I want to have that much control.
Yeah, exactly. But even so, people are wanting to, whether it's something like getting paid through PayPal, Apple Pay is doing this. That's a benign form of cashless society. But like I said, as long as people have the fundamental belief that at any time they can take their cash out of the bank,
right, they're fine
completely
with it.
content with doing it. But
they put limits on that too. Just an aside, they have a limit. And then depending on what bank you use, you can call them if they're actually open and increase the limit. But they have fraud protection like a motherfucker. I mean, I've been like last week or the week before, I had 2 or 3 days where I had to call them or to log into my bank account just to release the fraud protection, because when you're at there's this place I'll go to sometimes play I shouldn't really be saying this, but whatever. You can play machines there and you can take money out there as well. So they saw, oh, I took money out of my bank account and I took money out of this other place, and then right away it's, oh, we put a hold because of fraud. And I know, yeah, that's part of it, but I think they also use it as a way to help limit the amount of money you take out, because maybe you won't get in touch with them. Maybe you'll just say, well, fuck it, I won't bother.
Well, true. It's something like with Carrot Bars. First time when I signed up with the company and went and bought some gold, it's an international transaction. I used my bank debit card, and it wouldn't go through. So I had to call the bank and say, hey, this is transaction number. It's going to Stuttgart, Germany. Here's the company. And they said, okay. And they accepted it, and I haven't had any problems since. So, in that sense, I take it with a grain of salt. They're doing it for fraud protection, because if somebody does fraudulently use your credit card, by law, they have to recoup it.
Yeah,
so they're looking out for themselves.
I know they're looking out for themselves, but I think it also helps them in a sense of, somebody that was going to take out money might not end up taking out that money because of that. And if it's at a time where you can't get in touch with them, I guess now they have it, at least with Bank of America, where I can just log into my bank account and I'm good. But what if I didn't have my phone, or what if whatever, you know what I mean? So I might not be able to take that money out because of that until the next day. And maybe by that time I don't want to take it out. So I know that that the main purpose is, yeah, they're liable, but I'm sure it decreases, maybe by just a little, but I'm sure it decreases the amount of money that comes out. That it does stop some people from ending up taking money out.
True, and banks no longer have most of the physical cash on site anyway. So if you had an account that had like $100,000, and instead of asking for a cashier's check made out to you if you closed your account or bank wired it someplace else, if you were to go in there and ask for the money, they would give it to you. But one, they would put you'd be on the list of transactions. You may have the FBI or whoever come ask you. But the other thing they would do is they say you have to give us 3 to 4 days, and it would take them 3 to 4 days to get the physical cash shipped to them from the nearest Federal Reserve district to be able to pay you your money.
And let me just say this too to anybody listening, and I know you would agree with me on this as well. You're not getting any interest off of savings. So besides having money in the bank to pay bills, there's no other reason to have money in the bank.
Correct. That's why, like I said, when I signed up and joined Carrot Bars last March, any extra money that I don't use for pay bills, I buy gold with it. And it's stored in gold. It's stored offshore. And you know what? If I need to liquidate it, I can do it with the click of a mouse. So, and it uploads right to a debit MasterCard that I can use anywhere, including even ATMs if I need to get cash. So, like I said, we can rant and rave about the system, but the truth of the matter is there are a few ways to rebel from the system, and that's by taking your money out and putting it in something that's tangible that they can't touch. If they go to negative interest rates and you don't have money of any real value in your bank account except to pay bills, they're not going to take too much from you at all, pennies. But if they decide to end cash,
and that's what I do,
and they lock your bank accounts down and all it's electronic whatever, then you're screwed unless you go purchase something.
What's going to happen though anyway is direct deposit, and that's where you're going to have issues no matter what, because if you work for any other company and if it's going to a cashless society, or even, they're putting more controls in, what do you do with that money? So right now, most people do direct deposit. But even if you get a check, I guess you could just go somewhere and cash your check. But if it goes to cashless society, you can't. What are you going to do with a check?
On a side note, there's a few things before we wrap up here in 20 minutes or so. Did you hear about the man in Texas who they went after with SWAT teams for not paying on his student loans?
Yeah, I didn't hear the details, but I did hear that they went after somebody with a SWAT team for not paying on his student loans.
Yep. Paul Acker was arrested at his home for a $1,500 federal student loan he received in 1987. He said 7 deputy U.S. Marshals showed up at his house with guns, took him to federal court where he had to sign a payment plan for the 29-year-old loan. Now, something like this, and the fact that under Bush we removed student loans from the bankruptcy courts.
It was Clinton.
Clinton removed the bankruptcy courts. I know that
because I remember
Bush removed the bankruptcy laws to change from a full bankruptcy to then payouts.
It was during
Section
Bush.
13.
I know that it changed because I declared bankruptcy in 2011, and they were telling me how bankruptcy laws had changed recently, and that was under Bush. But as far as the student loans, from what I understand, and I've heard this from multiple people, it was under Clinton that you couldn't get rid of your student loans through bankruptcy, which, of course, I understand why they did that, because they're insured by the federal government, so the federal government doesn't want to have to pay them.
Exactly. That's what they do for backstopping it. You know, you create debt slaves by being the one who's the debtor. And this should be a wake-up call to all these millennials who borrowed tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars to go to college, where, 50% of all millennials now are living back at home. There's no real jobs making any type of wages. And now they're starting to go after people who are delinquent on student loans. This is a scary, scary, scary thing now.
So how do you have, again, I don't think we really talked about this, or if we did, it was just real quick. The president come out and remember what he said, because you had, you actually, when we talked about it briefly.
He said anybody who says the economy's not good is delusional?
Yes, that's what it was, is delusional.
Yeah. Well, of course, because it's even politics is a reality show. It's propaganda. They need to keep people thinking a certain way, otherwise they'll start taking action the opposite way that the government wants you to.
Well, obviously, I mean, right now, people should and please feel free to jump in if you think I'm wrong, but I would say save as much money as you possibly can, buy gold and silver with it, buy any other things that, like we talked about before. I mean, buy guns, buy fucking I want one of those solar generators.
By the way,
$1,000.
More and more states are getting ready for a return to the gold standard. On February 1st, the legislature for the state of Oklahoma created a new bill to create, just like Texas has, a gold depository for the future use of gold and silver as legal tender.
What does that mean, a gold depository, that you can actually deposit your gold?
What it means is that the state either has a certain amount of gold and silver right now. They can mine it from their own mines within the state that's not federal lands. They can go ahead and buy it on the open market, or have it repatriated if it's over at the Fed. And by keeping it in there, what they can do is people with dollars, they can decide that they want to open an account with the Oklahoma Treasury Depository and keep their money stored in gold and silver. Now, it's going to be a long while before this happens, and the bill hasn't even been passed. But this is the intention that's already going on in Utah. Utah has an agreement with the United Precious Mineral Association. And what they do is, they've got gold and silver stored, physical gold and silver stored in vaults, and people can open up savings accounts and even checking accounts where their money is then transferred into gold and silver, and that's what it's backed by.
Well, you mentioned something earlier that was interesting that I don't want to just gloss over, about the things that you can do, which they're getting to be less and less, but the things that you still can do to try to avoid the system or stay away from the system, or things that will help you to stay under the radar. I think there's less and less, to be honest. But, of course, one of the things is keeping your money out of the bank, except for bills. But what other things? I mean, I think about things like, black market economies. I mean, really, that I think is the fault of the people, to a point that we allow the government to, now corporations, of course, it's different and they help them out anyway, so fuck them. But when it comes to smaller businesses, Why register with the government? Why file tax IDs? Why even do all of this shit? Now, I know depending upon the business, you might have no chance of getting away with it. But depending upon the business, especially with maybe stuff through the internet and things like that, why not have more agorism or
the
have
point
more...
is that we are so overregulated that you can't own a business without a number of different permits and licenses. Yeah. And the requirement to get the permits and licenses require you to get a tax ID. And the tax ID, of course, then, and the other thing is if you want to if you want to be able to deduct expenses and depreciation on assets, or buildings or cars or whatever, then you got to have all that. That's the problem.
If you want, you're talking about tax deductions.
Yeah,
you got to do that with kids too, and which is fucked up. And I would rather just not take the deduction. Fuck
but you don't take. But if you're a business, that's your bread and butter. Okay, that's your bread and butter. Otherwise, you're going to pay. You're going to eat so much into profits that you're not going to be profitable.
Well, I guess it depends on the business, because if you're running a business where you're not paying any taxes at all anyway.
But see, in this case, okay, it is best not to rebel against what the rich do, but to do what the rich do. The rich don't pay taxes. You know why? Because they don't have earned income. They have holding companies and corporations. They're just managers over it. They can control everything but own nothing. That's how the rich do it. This is why when a poor farmer whose farm might be worth $6 million, and the kids can't pay the death tax on it, they got to sell the farm and it's gone. This is why they're screwed. But somebody like Ted Kennedy, who was in charge of the Kennedy compound in outside of Boston or wherever, Rhode Island, I'm not sure where it is. But when he died, the death tax should have been enormous, but they didn't have to pay taxes because all of their assets are in a corporate holding company, and he's not the owner; he was just the controller. And you don't have to pay taxes when the corporation didn't die; just a manager did.
I had an enormous head too,
and a big red nose from all that drinking.
But I started to notice that when I used to drink a lot. But only on weekends, of course. No, seriously. Since your
about
blood
the
weekends
makes but the point is that in these cases, you do what the rich do. You know what the rich are doing? The rich are offshoring their money. They're getting out of the system, and they're getting into international trusts. Well, you know what? You and I don't make enough money to hire the right attorneys to do international trusts, but we can move our money into gold and silver, and there are places that are very affordable. Other places to invest in is there are a number of different opportunities that are coming up offshore and internationally. One example, somebody I work with, former head trader at one of the top 5 banks in the world, he got out of the system because he saw how corrupt it is, but he has still a lot of contacts. He has a business contact down in Panama, the country of Panama. They were opening a new hotel. And what they were doing is they were looking for people to invest to buy a room. I think it was like $12,000 or $20,000 to buy the room.
Was it like a timeshare to actually buy the room, or buy a week, like a timeshare?
Buy the room. Okay. And what would happen is whenever somebody occupied that room, rented it for a night, you would get, for every single rent that went in there, you got a certain percentage of the cost that somebody paid for that room.
Right. It's kind of like a timeshare sort of. But...
perpetual income. Okay. These type of investments are there all throughout the world because, the U.S. has created so much regulation and made the game only with the loopholes for the rich. But the rest of the world doesn't do that. They're looking for people to invest. So if you have the contacts, you can move your money offshore and into things that, into assets that actually make you money, and it's a lot more, protected.
But
Can't
then
do that here. Here in the States, if you bought a farm and the state economy is going under and they're going bankrupt, all they have to do is raise your property taxes to an insane amount, and you can't afford to pay them, and they take your land.
But then you got people like Bernie Sanders that want to go after anybody who has offshore investments.
What can they do?
Instead of going
Panama,
after...
scream eminent domain in Panama, Panama would give them the middle finger.
Well...
If it's Europe, well, sure, Europe will just give them what they want.
You'd have to be careful on where.
There's a reason why billionaire Jim Rogers moved to Singapore and moved all his money out.
He likes little boys?
No, because the new economy is out of Asia.
Yeah, I've heard stuff about Thailand and Singapore and those
Mark Faber.
being,
You've heard of Mark Faber, haven't you?
Yeah, doesn't the Farber Institute, is that him?
Well, maybe, but he's a PhD economist. He's also an investor. Yeah, he moved to Thailand. He's from Austria by trade, but he got out of Europe. He moved to Thailand. He says, you know what? I got 4 motorcycles. I'm living the life. There's not a lot. There's only one rule. There's only one rule in Thailand that could get you instantly thrown in jail. You never say anything against the king. Nothing discriminatory, defacing, no insults.
Well, that's kind of,
But other than that, everything is pretty much open.
Well, I mean, there's a lot of times when people measure freedom, they measure it by the law, not the enforcement of the law. Because there's a lot of places that have a lot of laws, but they just don't enforce them anyway, so it doesn't fucking matter. One thing I wanted to ask you real quick in the 5 minutes that we have left, because we had talked about taxes, and that in order for your kids now to be deducted from your taxes, they have to have Social Security numbers. Now, you could get that at the hospital, because if I had kids, I would never want to get them Social Security numbers. Have you heard, because from what I understood is you could get a tax ID instead of getting a Social Security number and work under a tax ID as a U.S. citizen.
Well, you'd have to incorporate yourself.
Yeah, I've heard that, but you could still.
Well, you can do that, but one, it's much more trouble unless you have hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars, and a business that's bringing serious revenue. It's not worth that because, to pay an accountant to be able to deal with all that stuff.
Well, why would you have to pay an accountant? I'm just saying, because don't people that are here on visas just get tax IDs instead of Social Security numbers, and that's just how they get paid?
That may be true, but that's also tied to their green card.
But
or to their visa, because it's the same thing as if you and I were living offshore. The United States is only one of 2 countries in the entire world that demands that its citizens have to pay on foreign income.
Yeah, because
there's only 2.
They suck.
United States and this little podunk place that charges 2%. If you made $50,000 offshore from this little island thing, you pay 2% in taxes.
Yeah, but who the fuck's gonna pay it? How are they gonna know?
Well, they could keep you from ever coming back in.
Yeah, but how would they know? Is the point? If you made money in another country, how would they know? Especially if you made money in another country where the laws weren't as strict or
what you said about
enforced,
technology?
and you get paid in cash.
Remember what you said about technology?
Right.
There you go.
Is that how they would know or how they wouldn't know?
They passed FATCA.
Right, I know the bank. Yeah, but that's if you have a bank account. You don't have to have a bank account.
Where are you going to keep your money? If are you going to do it under the table? Are you going to make?
You could cash your check and then just keep your money in cash.
United Arab Emirates as an engineer make $125,000 there. Where are you going to keep it?
Keep it in a big safe.
That's
deposit
not feasible.
Box place.
See, think about it as what's feasible and what's not feasible.
Well, when do you owe the money though? Do you owe it yearly, or are they going to send somebody after you?
No, but any bank that is under the U.S. See, here's
they're just
going
to take it out of your bank account.
Here's why banks do it. Okay, as long as the dollar is the reserve currency and we use SWIFT, if the banks decide that they don't do it, they could get cut off from the dollar swap.
Right. No, I understand that, but what I'm saying is, how would the U.S. get the money when you come back? Or they could just take it right out of your bank account then?
They would probably send a thing to the ambassador of that country and say, get this out of the account. Because you know what's interesting is this is how desperate they are of capital controls. Since FATCA came into being, the U.S. has spent $1 trillion in investigating offshore bank accounts. $1 trillion. You know how much money they've actually recovered from that?
Probably a lot less.
13.5 billion.
Nice.
They spent $1 trillion to get back 13.5.
Yeah, well, that's their logic. They want to.
It's about control. They don't.
Yeah.
If they can print up as much money as they want, which they can, at this point, to me, things will change when the dollar is no longer the reserve currency, because then countries are going to give the middle finger to the U.S.
Or you could always just expatriate, and there you go. So,
by the way, on our last note, have you seen the new Monopoly game that's out?
No.
The new Monopoly game is called Ultimate Banking. There's no cash. It is an electronic little device, and you get these debit cards. And anytime you buy property, if you earn money from some other player, you swipe the card, and it keeps track of it. If you land on community chest or the luck cards, and you have to pay, it takes the tax right out.
Right, so they're trying to get kids ready for a cashless society as well.
Ironically, that this game, which came out earlier this week or over last weekend, is a cashless end of cash society where the banks control every aspect.
Yep, and they want kids to, I guess, learn it pretty quick. Well, thanks as always for joining us. That's all the time we have for tonight. Be sure to join us tomorrow when we talk all about what's going on with the Bundy family. Two of the brothers were arrested in Oregon, as well as Cliven Bundy was arrested in Portland when he flew in. So I don't know what the plan was there, if they had some of that planned, if they had planned to arrest him when he went to Portland or what. But we will be talking all about that, as well as other things that are going on in the news. So, again, be sure to tune in tomorrow, 7 o'clock Pacific, 10 o'clock Eastern, on Nonpartisan Liberty for All. Check us out at nonpartisanlibertyforall.com. Thanks, everybody. Appreciate you listening. Is that they'll say, well, in the past 10 years, in the past 20 years, in the past 50 years since JFK got assassinated or murdered by the U.S. government, whenever time they want to pick throughout history, that the Constitution started to derail. My whole premise is that governments are the problem. So immediately when you write and finalize that bill, well, I guess when you finalize it, because when you write it, it really doesn't mean anything at that point. Once you finalize a government and implement a government, you have essentially started the path to corruption, to violations of freedom, liberty, and the power of whoever the ones in control are starting to take over and take control over anybody's lives who lives in that geographical area. So essentially, the whole premise on the Supreme Court supports pretty much my premise, I guess, but it's open to interpretation and you can interpret it any way you want to. But I interpret it as the Constitution is a flawed document, just like every document, and government in itself. And if you look up the definition of government, I mentioned this many times, every definition has the word control in it. That government is the evil. That's where, in my opinion, people are confused. They want to fix government. They want government to work for them. They want government to be fair. They want all of these things. It does not exist in government because the definition of government has to do with rulers and people ruling over you, not everybody being equal. You can have an organized society where everybody is equal, but that would not be a government. Government rules at the barrel of a gun or any other weapon, whether it's a nuclear weapon or a missile or whatever it might be. That's what government is. So before Ken comes on, we're going to clarify what I failed to 100% clarify yesterday, as well as, if we have time, we'll get into something we didn't have time for yesterday. These parties about the, I guess, exciting candidates, the anti-establishment candidates, Bernie Sanders and Donald Trump. So if we have time, we'll get into that. So I wanted to start off with really what set this off was Marbury versus Madison, which I really didn't talk about yesterday, because the Constitution does not give the Supreme Court the ability to judge the constitutionality of laws. It doesn't. So then you would right away, at least I would, say, well, what the fuck? Who's going to make sure? And I'm just playing this from, see, this is always hard for me to do because I don't believe in government and I think it's a bunch of bullshit. Obviously, I don't.
We will defend these police officers.
Listen to police officers' commands, listen to what we tell you, and just stop. The nation needs to realize that when we tell you to do something, do it. And if you're wrong, you're wrong. If you're right, then the courts will figure it out.
We don't get to take the law, we enforce it. But at the end of the day, each and every man should go home safe. Sometimes the use of force is necessary. You need to comply with the police officer the way the system was meant to be. Comply with the orders of police officers. Resisting arrest is a real and dangerous crime.
Nonpartisan Liberty for All, and I'm your host, Dave Bourne. It is February 17th, 2016, and we are coming to you live from Las Vegas, Nevada. Thank you for tuning in to Nonpartisan Liberty for All. We're on weeknights Tuesday through Thursday at 7 o'clock Pacific, 10 o'clock Eastern, and you can listen live on Spreaker.com and nonpartisanlibertyforall.com, and to the archives on Spreaker, YouTube, Twitter, SoundCloud, and Tumblr immediately after the show. They are automatically posted to their respective sites. We promote the ideas of true freedom and liberty, meaning being able to do whatever you want as long as you respect the freedom of others and don't directly interfere with their freedom, as well as exposing government for what it is, a mafia based on extortion that rules without consent by threat of force and violence. Today, we have a few different things to talk about. Ken Schortgen will be joining us this week, who joins us every other Wednesday to talk about geopolitics and the economy. There are a lot of things going on in the economy, even though at the State of the Union about 3 weeks ago, according to the president, everything's great and everything's fine, but in reality, that is not the case. So we'll be talking about the economy, among other things, with Ken when he joins us at 8 o'clock Pacific time. Yesterday, I had talked about Justice Scalia and his passing, as well as the Supreme Court and how it was structured within the Constitution. So what I want to make sure I do today before Ken comes on, there were a few things that I don't think I explained as well as I could have. So what we're going to do is go through that, make sure that I explain those clearly and that people understand the meaning of the Constitution when I say that it's essentially meaningless. It's a document that was taken, was written up and then was taken and done with whatever government wanted to do. And when you give power to people or power over people, that's what happens. So again, one of the main differences I have with a lot of people is
that is the court's authority to review laws and legislative acts to determine whether they pass constitutional muster. The court found that the act was unconstitutional because it sought to expand the Supreme Court's original jurisdiction beyond that granted by the Constitution. The court declined to exercise jurisdiction over Marbury's claim. This case established the Supreme Court's power of judicial review, a function so central to the role of the judiciary in modern jurisprudence, that the following quote from Marshall's opinion is carved on the wall of the Supreme Court building. The quote goes, "It is emphatically the province and duty of the judicial department to say what the law is." Though judicial review was not a new idea, this case firmly ensconced the principle in American law. Marbury v. Madison remains one of the most important cases in American jurisprudence. If you found this video helpful,
promoting the ideas of true freedom and liberty, nonpartisan liberty for all radio with Dave Bourne.
So essentially what had happened there was, to summarize, is that the Supreme Court made their decision. So before this had happened, the Supreme Court didn't have the right to rule something unconstitutional. But what they did was, on their own, without it being written into the Constitution, Marshall said, okay, and it was probably to fuck with Jefferson, as I assume he was a Federalist because he was Secretary of State under Adams. So what happened was he used there was a law passed, I guess some Judiciary Act of 1789. The details are really irrelevant for what we're talking about. But he ruled that based on Article 3 of the Constitution that law was unconstitutional. Therefore, he ruled in favor of Madison. So, and Tom Hartman had actually brought this up on the clip we played yesterday, that Jefferson was kind of screwed because he didn't want the Supreme Court to have this power. He didn't want 9 people to be able to make laws with the majority rule. He had thought, and he was wrong in this as well, that you just vote the people out. You vote out Congress and have them repeal the law. As we all know, that's not going to happen. So there should have been some other way to validate, or some other type of branch, or, I mean, there should have been something else that didn't give power to that amount of people, because obviously look at the impact it's having today. Now, it had a lot of impact back then too, not in this specific case, but Jefferson, looking at the case, and let's go back to the case for a minute. So he didn't want all these judges appointed. Adams said, I'm going to appoint all these judges. Marshall didn't give out all the commissions to all these judges. So that are offended. I grew up in Massachusetts. I lived in Las Vegas for 15 years. But he did it, what it seems like is he did it on purpose just to piss off Jefferson. So he hired all of these judges last minute, literally the night before, from what I understand, where they had to go, and I don't know what their process was, like give them their judges' documents or whatever, and they weren't even able to accomplish it. Another thing, and it mentions it, is John Marshall was secretary of something. He was the one who was giving these out. He was also the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. I don't know if he became the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court the next day, or he was both at the same time. But we'll continue this.
Panic Act, both of which created dozens of new judgeships and justiceships. Adams spent the next few weeks, his last in office, appointing dozens of Federalists. These appointees became known as the Midnight Judges and the Midnight Justices of the Peace. The group obtained wholesale approval from Congress on March 2nd. The commissions were signed by Adams and sealed by the Secretary.
And just to add, of course, Federalists who are more in support of the stronger federal government would want more federal judges, because more control to the federal government.
Of State on March 3rd. The last remaining step was for the commissions to be physically delivered to the appointees by the Secretary of State. Who was Adams's Secretary of State? John Marshall, who had already been appointed Chief Justice of the Supreme Court.
Okay, so that's where, as I said, John Marshall was a secretary. I didn't know which secretary was, but Secretary of State. And as I had said, he was appointed to Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. So I don't know if it actually took effect literally the next day is when he moved out of Secretary of State, because Adams was leaving, and moved into the Chief Justice spot.
Marshall was unable to deliver all of the commissions before Jefferson was sworn in the next day by Marshall himself in his role as Chief Justice. The undelivered commissions were still in Marshall's office when James Madison, the new Secretary of State, took office. Jefferson told Madison not to deliver the commissions. William Marbury, whom Adams had appointed Justice of the Peace of the District of Columbia, was one of the appointees who had not received his commission. Congress had authorized the United States Supreme Court to issue writs of mandamus under the Judiciary Act of 1789. So Marbury brought suit against Madison in the United States Supreme Court under its original jurisdiction to compel Madison to deliver the commission. Writing for a unanimous court, Chief Justice Marshall first concluded that Marbury had been lawfully appointed and confirmed as Justice of the Peace, and therefore had a right to his commission. Marshall went on to say that Marbury was entitled to redress under the law for the deprivation of that right. Unfortunately for Marbury, however, the court refused to issue the writ. The court held that the section of the Judiciary Act of 1789 conferring original jurisdiction to issue writs of mandamus on the Supreme Court was unconstitutional. The court found that this provision was at odds with Article 3 of the Constitution, which specifically lays out the Supreme Court's original jurisdiction. though it empowers Congress to pass laws related to the court's appellate jurisdiction. In a landmark move, the court recognized its power of judicial review.
I believe in the Constitution. I believe in an organized society. But the first thing that most people would say is, okay, we're looking at a government that is going to fail to protect people's rights and freedoms, which of course it fails to do that now. So what's the fucking difference? But in theory, it should be able to protect your rights and freedoms. So what happens when your Second Amendment rights are violated? Well, what would happen now is it would end up in the Supreme Court, depending on how the Supreme Court was, quote unquote, stacked, because it's all about who appoints who, what party they're a part of, and it all has to do with politics. And people will say, well, back then it didn't have to do with politics. And maybe it didn't. I don't know. I wasn't around back then, and I'm not an expert in history. But I will say that it's just common sense that if you have 9 people essentially making laws and interpreting your government, and not only that, doing it by majority rules. It's not like all 9 have to agree, which still wouldn't be good enough, but it'd be better than just majority rules. You have a problem there. So before Marbury versus Madison, the Supreme Court did not rule, which was about, 20 years, if that. It was in 1803. It wasn't very long. Actually, it's probably around 16 years, something like that, because Jefferson was just taking office. So the country was pretty young at that point. And Marbury versus Madison will actually play a short clip to explain it, but essentially it had to do with Adams trying to Adams was a Federalist. Jefferson was taking over. He was an anti-Federalist or a classical liberal, and it seemed like Adams just kind of wanted to piss him off. But we'll play this short clip to explain it in very simple terms. And that's not it. That's Eric B. and Rakim.
The presidential election of 1800 was one of the most contentious in our young nation's history. Federalist President John Adams fought for re-election, but it became clear that the anti-Federalists, led by Democratic Republican and Vice President Thomas Jefferson, would take the office. Meanwhile, in an effort to preserve the influence of the party, the Federalist-led Congress passed the Judiciary Act of 1801, now known as the Midnight Judges Act, which reorganized the federal judiciary and the District of Columbia organized.
So basically, what Adams wanted to do, because he was a bitter baby, I guess, well, he is from Massachusetts, he and all those people from Massachusetts